Hey there, tonight we're diving into the frothy world of brewing beer in ancient Egypt, where the truth is that this everyday staple was so vital, it was often safer to drink than water. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You wake up to another sun-soaked morning in ancient Egypt, where the Nile isn't just a river, it's the lifeblood of everything you know. As you stretch and shake off sleep, there's no Instagram or morning coffee to kickstart your day. Instead, beer is on the menu. Yep, you heard right. Before you wrinkle your nose, let's clarify. In this time and place, beer is as essential as water. It's like the Wi-Fi of ancient Egyptian society. Everyone relies on it, and life pretty much shuts down without it. So, why is beer such a cornerstone here? Well, for starters, it's not the fancy craft brew you might be picturing. Forget about hops and fancy labels. This is a hearty, porridge-like concoction made from emmer wheat and barley, fermented into something that's a little sour, a little sweet, and surprisingly nutritious. And given that everyone from the pharaoh to the farmhands is knocking it back, it's both a great equalizer and an economic powerhouse. By now you're probably wondering, how do they whip up this ancient brew? The process is fascinatingly rudimentary, yet effective. You start with emmer wheat and barley, grown along the fertile banks of the Nile. Picture this. You're in a bustling brewery courtyard, with workers bustling around like bees in a hive. They're soaking the grains in water, letting them sprout, then drying and grinding them into a coarse flour. This malt is the magic ingredient that's going to turn sugary grains into the beer everyone craves. Next, the malt is mixed with water to form a thick dough, which is then baked into loaves. Don't think of your average sandwich bread. These are more like dense, squat bricks. They're crumbled back into the water, creating a mash that's left to ferment in large clay jars. And there you have it, the unfiltered, slightly chunky brew that fuels the civilization. All told, it's a process that combines the elements of baking and brewing in one seamless, ancient method. Now, let's talk numbers. Some say beer accounted for up to 20% of the calories in an average Egyptian diet. It was served at every meal, consumed by all ages, and even used as currency. Workers were often paid in beer rations, about 4 to 5 liters per day for a laborer building those impressive pyramids. That's right, those monumental feats of engineering were fueled by kegs of barley brew. Imagine a modern construction site paying its workers in pints. It's an eyebrow-raising thought, but here, it's just practical economics. While we're on the subject of economics, beer wasn't just a thirst quencher. It was a staple that supported the entire social structure. The production of beer provided jobs, stabilized food supplies, and contributed to what we might call the GDP of ancient Egypt. From the brewers crafting the suds to the farmers growing the grains, beer was at the heart of an economic ecosystem. And speaking of heart, let's dispel a myth. Ancient Egyptians didn't think of beer as a boozy indulgence. It was sustenance, like bread, but with a kick. We have to mention the nuts and bolts of the brewing operation, too. The tools involved would make any modern brewer cringe, yet they got the job done. Clay pots, wooden paddles, and woven baskets were the standard equipment. Each pot, about the size of a modern trash can, was used for mashing and fermenting. They were crafted with care, ensuring the brew was kept cool and safe from contamination. It's a far cry from the stainless steel tanks and temperature-controlled rooms used today, but it worked, and that's what matters. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit like a party in a pot, you're not entirely wrong. Beer was celebrated for its role in religious and social gatherings. It was offered to the gods, consumed at feasts, and used to toast everything from successful harvests to the construction of monuments. But before you start romanticizing it too much, remember this. It was also a practical necessity. In a world without clean water, beer was a safe, reliable source of hydration. As the sun climbs higher, you begin to appreciate the sheer ingenuity of this ancient society. They turned the resources at hand, cereal grains and river water, into a beverage that sustained life, supported the economy, and built a civilization. Yet, it wasn't all sunshine and suds. The brewing process was labor-intensive. requiring a coordinated effort from many hands. It was a daily grind that reflected the rhythms of life along the Nile, where everyone had a role to play, from sowing the seeds to serving the final product. In the grand tapestry of history, beer is more than just a drink. It's a testament to human innovation, a symbol of community, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. So, as you finish your morning pint and prepare for the day ahead, take a moment to appreciate the ancient alchemy that transformed grains and water into something that nourished both body and soul. And remember, even in the land of the pyramids, it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. But before you wipe the foam from your lips and think of ancient Egyptian brewing as a sunlit dance of grains and smiles, let's step into the mid-morning hustle of an actual brewery. Imagine the scene. The sun is blazing, turning the brewery courtyard into what feels like a sauna with palm trees. It's chaos, but organized chaos, with workers weaving around each other like an intricate tapestry of toil. The reality is, brewing beer in ancient Egypt was less of a leisurely craft and more of a production line. Think assembly plant, but with a backdrop of papyrus and pyramids. At the heart of this operation is the head brewer, often imagined as a jolly figure, perhaps with a pot-belly and a permanent grin. But the truth is a bit more sobering. This brewmaster was more likely a seasoned manager, juggling the logistics of grain supplies, the intricacies of fermentation times, and the temperamental demands of the seasonal Nile floods. Forget the romantic image of a master artisan. This guy was more of a project manager, with all the stress that comes with it, minus the PowerPoint presentations. Hierarchy was everything in this world, and the brewing industry was no exception. The brewmaster was at the top, but beneath him was a bustling hierarchy of skilled and unskilled laborers, each with a specific role to play. From the grain grinders to the jar washers, everyone had their niche. And speaking of niches, women were pivotal in this process. They weren't just bystanders, they were the backbone. In fact, women often held the role of master brewer, a testament to their expertise in an era that was otherwise not exactly a bastion of gender equality. Their involvement was so integral that the goddess Hathor, often depicted with a beer jar, was the patron deity of brewers. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this proto-feminist utopia. The reality of labor conditions was far from idyllic. Picture this: long hours in the heat, the constant risk of infections from insect bites, and the physical demand of hauling around clay jars that weighed as much as your average teenager. Plus, cleanliness was a perpetual challenge. Without the luxury of modern sanitation, keeping contamination at bay was as much an art form as the brewing itself. And if you think OSHA violations are bad today, just imagine the medieval equivalent of workplace safety. As you navigate this bustling scene, the economic context becomes apparent. Brewing was a high-stakes business, with output directly linked to societal stability. Beer wasn't just a beverage, it was a currency and a staple of daily rations, especially for the workforce constructing those iconic pyramids. In a sense, beer was the original liquid asset. It lubricated the gears of the economy, quite literally fueling the labor force. This was no small feat, considering nearly 20,000 workers were likely on site at Giza at any given time, each guzzling down their daily liters. Talk about liquid motivation. Yet, it's not all about the grind and the grain. Brewing also had a social and political dimension. Beer was at the heart of religious ceremonies, a sacred offering to the gods, and a social lubricant at feasts and festivals. It was both a divine gift and a democratic equalizer. But while the idea of a society united by their love of beer might sound charming, the reality was a bit more sobering. The demands of social order and religious observance often meant that breweries were under intense scrutiny, with quotas to meet and quality to maintain. Failure wasn't just a personal setback, it was a communal crisis. In this world, the myth of the happy brewmaster holds a certain allure, but it crumbles under the weight of historical reality. Brewing was back-breaking work, a daily grind that mirrored the tides of the Nile, constant, unyielding, and crucial to survival. Yet, this relentless toil was what kept the civilization thriving. It's a testament to human resilience and innovation, turning the humble grain into a cornerstone of life itself. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and continue your tour of this ancient beer hub, remember, behind every sip of this ancient brew, there was a laborer, a leader, a system, each as vital as the beer itself. And as the day progresses, the brewery remains a hive of activity, with each worker, whether grinding, mashing, or fermenting, contributing to the greater whole. It's a place where the personal and the communal collide, where the challenges of production are met with the rewards of camaraderie and shared purpose. This is a world where beer isn't just a beverage. It's a livelihood, a tradition, and a testament to the enduring power of community. So next time you lift a glass, maybe give a silent nod to those ancient brewers who paved the way, one jar at a time. As the day pushes past its midpoint, the Egyptian sun turns the brewery into something akin to a clay-fired oven. But don't let the heat fool you into thinking these ancient brewmasters were sweating bricks without a plan. Nope, they had a few tricks up their linen sleeves to keep the beer flowing and the brews cool, even when the mercury, or whatever they used to measure heat back then, was skyrocketing. Now, let's talk about the technological wizardry of ancient Egyptian brewing. First off, forget any notions of high-tech gadgets or stainless steel. Clay was the material du jour, and boy, did they make the most of it. Large clay jars, ingeniously porous, were used for fermentation. Here's the kicker. These parts had a dual purpose. They weren't just about holding the brew, they also played a role in temperature regulation. The porous nature allowed for a sort of natural cooling system. Evaporation through the clay helped keep the beer at a decent temperature. It's like they invented the ancient equivalent of the beer fridge, minus the hum of electricity. But wait, there's more. Fermentation was a delicate dance with the elements. Wild yeasts floating on the Nile breeze did the heavy lifting, turning sugars into alcohol. It's a bit like letting nature decide the playlist at a party, unpredictable, but often hitting the right notes. This element of chance meant consistency was a challenge, though some brews were probably as smooth as a cat's purr, while others might have been more akin to a crocodile's growl. And yet, despite the variability, beer was consistently a staple of the diet. Now, let's dive into the fascinating world of storage. Once fermented, the beer wasn't just left to fend for itself. No, Siri, storage was crucial, especially in a climate where the sun could turn a refreshing brew into a bacterial nightmare. Enter the Nile mud. Those clever Egyptians used mud seals to cap their jars, effectively locking out contaminants while keeping the brew fresh. Picture those seals as the original tamper-evident caps, minus the annoying plastic rings. Economically, this was a game changer. By extending the shelf life, beer could be transported further, traded more widely, and stored for longer. This wasn't about having a few extra pints for a rainy day. This was about ensuring a steady supply for the laborers and the lords, the priests and the peasants. A reliable stockpile meant stability, and in a society as hierarchical as ancient Egypt, stability was everything. It was what kept the pyramids rising and the people fed. Speaking of pyramids, the brewing techniques were as monumental in their ingenuity as the structures themselves. Think about it. All this innovation without a single blueprint or CAD software. Just a deep understanding of their environment and a willingness to experiment. Their approach to brewing was as methodical as it was mystical, blending practical know-how with a touch of divine inspiration. After all, gods like Osiris and Hathor were said to have a hand in the process, making beer not just a drink but a divine elixir. Yet let's not get too misty-eyed about this so-called divine intervention. The reality was often grittier. Brewing was labor-intensive, requiring constant attention and a keen eye for detail. And let's face it, the conditions were far from ideal. Sweltering heat, buzzing insects, and the ever-present threat of spoilage were enough to make any brewmaster break into a sweat. And without modern sanitation, contamination was a constant nemesis. Those clay jars might have been the heroes of the hour, but they were also potential hotbeds for bacteria if not handled properly. So, while the myth of the magical brew persists, the truth is that brewing in ancient Egypt was a battle against the elements, a testament to human tenacity and ingenuity. It's a reminder that necessity truly is the mother of invention, or in this case, the mother of fermentation. And as the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the bustling brewery, it's clear that every drop of beer was hard-earned, a product of both human effort and environmental adaptation. In this sun-soaked landscape, the brews they crafted were more than just beverages. They were symbols of resilience, community, and the relentless drive to overcome the odds. So next time you raise a glass, think of those ancient brewers who, with nothing more than clay, grain, and a bit of Nile magic, brewed up a legacy that still resonates today. And as the day winds down, remember, behind every sip of this ancient ale was not just a process, but a story of survival, creativity, and the unyielding human spirit. As the late afternoon sun begins to stretch its fingers across the ancient Egyptian landscape, blending the golden hues of the desert with the fertile greens of the Nile's floodplain, you start to see beer in a new light, or perhaps under the glow of a more mystical aura. Here, beer isn't merely a beverage. It's a cultural cornerstone, woven into the very fabric of society, like the threads of a colorful tapestry. Let's dive into the divine associations that beer enjoyed in ancient Egypt. Picture this, a pantheon of gods who not only sipped the suds but practically bathed in them. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, was a big beer enthusiast. He wasn't just the overseer of the dead. He was considered the one who taught humans how to brew. Forget about Bacchus or Dionysus. Osiris is your ancient brewing buddy, the original beer influencer. Inscriptions from temples and tombs often depict him enjoying a frothy pint, reinforcing the notion that beer was a sacred gift bestowed upon humanity. It's like the ultimate divine endorsement deal. Then there's Hathor, the goddess of music, dance, and fertility, often depicted with a cow's horns and a sun disk, sometimes even a beer jar for good measure. She was the party planner of the gods, ensuring that the celestial gatherings never ran dry. In her role as the patron deity of brewing, she was said to have used beer to save the world. According to myth, when the goddess Sekhmet got a little too zealous in her plans to destroy humanity, as one does, Hathor persuaded her to drink beer dyed red to look like blood. Sekhmet, thinking it was a river of blood, drank herself into a stupor, thus sparing humanity. Beer as the ultimate peacekeeper. Who knew? But let's not get too carried away with these divine tales. The reality was a bit more grounded, though no less fascinating. Beer played a crucial role in religious offerings and rituals. It was served at temples, offered to the gods alongside bread and other staples, ensuring the divine beings remained appeased and the Nile continued to flood predictably. And while the priests might have been the ones pouring the libations, you can bet they were sampling the goods too. After all, ensuring quality control in divine offerings is a serious business. Speaking of business, let's not forget the economic aspect of these offerings. Beer wasn't just a spiritual lubricant, it was a commodity, a currency of sorts. In temples, beer rations were doled out to workers and priests alike, a testament to its value in daily life. Beer rations ensured loyalty and productivity, much like your modern-day perks of free coffee and office snacks, except these were delivered in clay jars instead of plastic cups. Moreover, beer was central to festivals and public celebrations. During the Apit festival, a grand event held in Thebes to honor the gods Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu, beer flowed like, well, the Nile in full flood. This multi-day extravaganza brought together all layers of society in a communal celebration, blurring the lines between social classes as everyone partook in the joyous libations. Even slaves and servants were given extra rations, a rare nod to equality in a society defined by its rigid hierarchy. Beer, the great equalizer, the social glue in a world that often seemed to run on hieroglyphs and hierarchies. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Beer might have been a social equalizer during festivals, but that didn't change the harsh realities of everyday life. The gap between the myth of a society united by beer and the reality of one divided by class and power was as wide as the Nile itself. The pharaohs might have toasted their victories with the same brew that slaked the thirst of their laborers, but the lines of power and privilege remained deeply etched in the sand. In terms of daily rituals, beer was as ubiquitous as papyrus scrolls in a scribe's study. It was consumed at every meal, often mixed with other ingredients like dates or herbs to enhance the flavor. And while it sounds delightful, remember that the average ancient Egyptian wasn't sipping on a frothy pint in a sunlit courtyard. More likely, they were downing a chunky, unfiltered concoction in a dusty worksite or a cramped home, with flies buzzing around like uninvited dinner guests. The reality of daily life was far from the romanticized visions of eternal feasts and divine banquets. But it wasn't just about drinking beer. It was about what beer symbolized. It represented sustenance and safety in a world where those couldn't be taken for granted. Offering beer to the gods was a way of asking for protection, for a good harvest, for the Nile to flood just enough. Not too much, not too little. It was about striking a balance, an eternal dance with nature and the divine. And in a society where the whims of the river could make or break a year, that was no small feat. So, as you ponder the cultural and religious significance of beer in ancient Egypt, remember this. While the myths and legends paint a picture of divine interventions and celestial parties, the truth was often more sober. Beer was a cornerstone of survival, a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. From the fields of grain to the jars in the temple, it was a journey marked by both divine favor and human effort, a legacy that still resonates, pint for pint, through the ages. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Nile, the myths and realities of ancient Egyptian beer remain as intertwined as the reeds by the riverbank. In the end, beer was more than just a drink. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of life itself, a story of gods and grains, of power and people, and of a civilization that found sustenance and spirit in a simple brew. Keep that in mind as you consider the next chapter in this ancient tale, where the threads of history continue to weave their intricate patterns, one jar at a time. And so, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Nile, the myths and realities of ancient Egyptian beer remain as intertwined as the reeds by the riverbank. Let's now turn our attention to the unsung heroes of the Egyptian economy, the distribution and transportation of this liquid gold. Without these systems, the beer would have remained just a local delicacy, never achieving its status as a cultural staple. First things first, the mighty Nile. It wasn't just a scenic backdrop for Egyptian life, it was the superhighway of its time. Picture it as the Amazon prime of ancient Egypt, efficient, crucial, and let's be honest, sometimes temperamental. Beer was transported in large ceramic jars, carefully sealed with mud to preserve freshness and prevent contamination. These jars were loaded onto boats that sailed the Nile, navigating its currents like ancient FedEx couriers. The Nile enabled distribution on a grand scale, ensuring that beer could reach the farthest corners of the kingdom. This wasn't just about logistics, it was about maintaining a lifeline to every corner of the civilization. Without the Nile, the beer might have stayed a local affair, confined to the regions where it was brewed. Economic distribution wasn't as simple as brew it, and they will come. Nope, it was a complex network of trade and barter. Beer was often used as payment for labor. The workers constructing the pyramids, for instance, were paid in daily beer rations. Ever tried paying your rent with a six-pack? Wouldn't fly today, but back then it was an accepted currency. However, not all beer was created equal. The type of brew you received could depend on your social status. High-quality, finely filtered beer was reserved for the elite. Think of it as the craft beer of the ancient world. Meanwhile, the workers were usually given a more robust, less refined version. So, while beer was indeed a unifier, it also highlighted the stratifications within Egyptian society. Now, let's debunk a myth. Ancient Egypt was not a utopia of equal opportunity drinkers. Class distinctions were as rigid as the pyramids themselves. The idea that everyone had the same access to beer is a romantic notion, but reality bites harder. While the elites enjoyed their premium brews in ornate cups, the common folk often drank from simple clay vessels. The difference wasn't just in the container, it was in the brew itself. The elite's beer was often brewed with additional ingredients like honey or herbs to enhance its flavor, a luxury not afforded to the everyday laborer. The legacy of Egyptian brewing is as enduring as the taste of a cold one on a hot day. The techniques and practices developed along the Nile have left a lasting imprint on brewing traditions. The use of natural fermentation, the art of sealing jars, and even the notion of beer as a community staple have all survived the test of time. Modern brewers might scoff at the lack of precision in ancient methods, but they'd be hard-pressed to replicate the cultural significance that Egyptian beer held in its heyday. As we raise a glass to these ancient brewmasters, let's acknowledge the grit and grind behind each sip. Brewing was not a leisurely craft, but a vital industry, as integral as the grain it was made from. The myth surrounding Egyptian beer may paint a picture of divine revelry, but the reality was a society that depended on this brew for sustenance and structure. It was more than a drink. It was a way of life, a cornerstone of the economy, and a testament to human ingenuity. In the end, the story of beer in ancient Egypt is one of both romance and reality. It's a tale of guards and grains, of labor and leisure, of a civilization that turned a humble brew into a symbol of survival and community. And as the stars begin to twinkle over the Nile, we're reminded that behind every myth is a kernel of truth, just as behind every sip of beer is a history as rich and complex as the brew itself. So next time you crack open a cold one, give a nod to those ancient Egyptians who navigated the Nile, brewed with the gods, and left a legacy that still resonates today, one jar at a time. In a world where goats were currency and bartering a sheep for a sack of grain was a logistical nightmare, the invention of coinage was like the ancient world's version of downloading a money management app. The scene is set. We're in the bustling agora of an ancient Greek city-state, circa 600 BCE. Picture a swirling mass of humanity shouting, haggling, and trading everything from olives to philosophical ideas. This place was like Wall Street, but with more togas and considerably less technology. It was here, amidst the chaos of ancient commerce, that the first coins began to clink into existence. Coins, as it turns out, were a revolutionary upgrade from the old-school barter system. Sure, trading a goat for an amphora sounds quaint in theory, but in practice, it was about as convenient as trying to pay your rent in chickens. Enter the Lydians, the first known civilization to mint coins. These folks were the Steve Jobs of the ancient economy. Around the 7th century BCE, they had the bright idea to start using pieces of metal as a standardized medium of exchange. The Lydians introduced coins made from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, which meant these coins weren't just shiny, they had intrinsic value. The magic of coins didn't stop in Lydia. Like a catchy TikTok trend, it spread quickly to the Greek city-states. Aegina, Athens, Corinth, they all jumped on the coinage bandwagon, each putting their own spin on this metal marvel. Aegina, not to be outdone, minted the earliest known Greek coins featuring a turtle design. Why a turtle? Maybe they had a thing for slow and steady, or perhaps it was an inside joke about their trading speed. The Athenian coins, however, sported the iconic owl. This wasn't just a nod to Athena, their patron goddess of wisdom, but also a clever branding move. The Athenian owl became the ancient equivalent of the Nike swoosh, a symbol recognized far and wide. And then there was Corinth, whose coins bore the image of Pegasus, the mythical winged horse. Pegasus wasn't just a pretty face. He was a symbol of Corinth's naval prowess and their aspirations to trade dominion. In a world where myths and business were intertwined like DNA strands, these coin designs were as much about propaganda as they were about money. But let's be real. While these coins were wrapped in mythological symbolism, the real driving force behind their creation was practicality. Coins were small, portable, and didn't poop all over the agora. The spread of coinage was also a social and political game changer. Prior to coins, the value was tied up in objects, livestock, grain, or precious goods. Coins introduced an abstract concept of value, facilitating trade over greater distances and encouraging the growth of economies. It was like giving the economy a shot of espresso and watching it wake up. Coins made it easier for city-states to trade with each other, to levy taxes, and to pay soldiers. You could say coins were the original multi-tool of economic strategy. The romantic myths surrounding these early coins are charming, but the harsh reality is they were largely about control and influence. Coins allowed city-states to project power far and wide. The designs were not just aesthetic choices, they were deliberate political statements. A coin in your pocket was a daily reminder of the power and reach of your city-state. It was patriotism you could jingle. And while it's tempting to imagine these early Greek coins as being born out of an artistic epiphany, the truth is they were more about economic necessity and political clout than anything else. So next time you dig out that loose change from the depths of your couch, spare a thought for those ancient coins. They were the pioneers, the rock stars of the financial world, setting the stage for the complex economies we know today. And if you ever find yourself complaining about carrying a pocket full of change, just be glad you're not dragging a goat to the market to buy your morning coffee. Now that we've ditched the goats and embraced the clink of coinage, let's dive into the economic power surge that turned Athens into the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world. Picture this: Athens, a city-state that hit the silver jackpot. We're talking about the Laurian mines, a silver bonanza that had Athenians grinning like they'd just discovered the ancient equivalent of Bitcoin. Located about 50 kilometers south of Athens, these mines were the financial backbone of the city from the 6th century BCE onwards. The sheer volume of silver extracted was staggering, with some estimates suggesting that over 3,000 tons were pulled from the earth. That's a lot of shiny owl coins. This influx of silver wasn't just stuffing the Athenian treasury. It was a game changer for trade and military might. Imagine being able to fund a massive naval fleet without having to pawn off your family heirlooms. The Athenian navy, which became the envy of the Mediterranean, was largely financed by the silver from Laurian. With their new ships, the Athenians weren't just sailing, they were asserting dominance. This naval prowess turned Athens into a trading powerhouse, facilitating commerce across the seas and filling their coffers even further. It was a virtuous cycle of silver and power, the ancient version of having a trust fund and a startup that actually takes off. But let's not forget the other side of the coin, literally. As coins became the lingua franca of trade, the issue of taxation could no longer be swept under the agora rug. Coins made it possible to levy taxes more efficiently, which, in turn, funded public projects and military campaigns. It was goodbye to the Barter tax, where you'd have to deliver your best sheep to the tax collector. Now, you could just hand over those shiny pieces of metal. The Athenians even began to mint larger denominations, so you weren't jingling your way down the street like a one-person percussion band. Of course, where there's money, there's mischief. Enter the counterfeiters, those crafty individuals who thought they could pull a fast one on the Greek merchants. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. Coin counterfeiting was as much a part of ancient life as it is today. Imagine trying to pass off a fake Athenian drachma only to be called out by a savvy merchant who knew his silver from his lead. These counterfeiters were the ancient world's version of Photoshop scammers, trying to dupe merchants with gilded fakes. The Greeks, however, were no fools. They developed methods to test the authenticity of coins, such as the sound test, tapping a coin to hear if it rang true, a bit like a sommelier swishing wine. And then there was the vanity project of slapping leaders' faces on coins. Talk about a PR move that was both genius and a little cringe-worthy. Rulers figured that minting coins with their likeness would be a great way to remind everyone who was in charge, an ancient social media campaign, if you will. While the rulers were busy preening, the average Greek might have been rolling their eyes at the narcissism. After all, the point of currency was utility, not an ego trip. Coins didn't just transform the economy, they reshaped society itself. They brought about a shift in social structures, encouraging trade beyond the local market and integrating the city-states into a wider economic web. The newfound wealth from trade and mining allowed for the patronage of the arts, philosophy and science, a cultural boom that was as much about wealth as it was about intellectual curiosity. The Athenians became cultural trendsetters, their ideas spreading as far as their coins did. Ultimately, coins were more than just metal discs. They were symbols of power, tools of politics, and catalysts for cultural change. They turned Athens from a modest city-state into an empire of influence, and they set the stage for the financial systems we rely on today. So next time you find yourself grumbling about taxes or rolling your eyes, a politician's face plastered on a billboard, remember the ancient Greeks. They were dealing with the same issues, just with a bit more style and a lot more silver. If the Athenians were the Silicon Valley of ancient Greece, then their coins were the viral apps that everyone needed on their scrolls. But while Athens was busy mining silver and stacking ships, something fascinating was happening in the world of coin artistry. As the classical period rolled in, around 480 to 323 BCE, the Greeks transformed their coins from mere currency into miniature works of art. We're talking about a shift from basic designs to intricate masterpieces that would make any numismatist's heart skip a beat. It was as if someone took the ancient version of a crayon drawing and turned it into a full-blown Monet. Take a step back and imagine this. Coins weren't just pocket change. They were like tiny canvases telling stories of gods, heroes, and epic myths. Now, you might think these coins were designed by the Michelangelo of Greece, but the reality is far less glamorous. Sure, some coins were crafted by skilled artisans, but many designs were the handiwork of whoever happened to owe the city-state a favor. Picture the local smith, not exactly a renowned artist, just trying to make a quick drachma before heading home to dinner. Despite this, Greek coins evolved into stunning pieces of art. The designs were rich in detail and brimming with cultural symbolism. They became the Parcheman cards of their time, each one depicting iconic figures like Athena, Hercules, or Pegasus. Collect them, trade them, show them off. Each coin was a piece of cultural propaganda. Athens, Corinth, and other city-states were not just minting currency. They were broadcasting their identity and values to anyone who laid eyes on their coinage. It was ancient branding at its finest. Let's talk numbers. By the 5th century BCE, Athens was producing more than 500 coins per day, a staggering output that underscores both their economic clout and their artistic ambitions. These coins weren't just transactions, they were statements. An Athenian coin stamped with the owl wasn't just a nod to Athena, it was a flaunt of wisdom and power, a reminder of Athens' dominance in trade, culture, and military prowess. But behind these beautiful designs lay a less glamorous truth. The myth that these coins were crafted by top-tier artists is just that, a myth. Often, the designs were selected for their political resonance rather than their artistic merit. It was like hiring a graffiti artist to paint a national monument because his cousin knew someone on the council. Coins served as tools of cultural propaganda, much like today's social media posts, carefully curated to project an image, whether or not it matched reality. And let's not overlook the practical aspect. These coins were the ancient equivalent of a LinkedIn profile, a way for city-states to showcase their achievements and aspirations. If you were a Greek merchant in a foreign land, that little owl or Pegasus on your coin was a passport, a badge of credibility that vouched for your city-state's prowess. It wasn't just about buying goods, it was about buying into a brand. As Greek coins spread, so did their influence. They weren't just local currency, they were international ambassadors. The designs were not only about aesthetics, but also about power play. Greek coins made their way into the furthest reaches of the known world, from the bustling markets of Egypt to the far-flung outposts of the Persian Empire. Each coin was a small, jingling piece of cultural diplomacy, a reminder of where it had come from and the power it represented. Now, let's bust another bubble. The romantic notion that all Greek coinage was minted for noble reasons is just that, romantic. Behind the gods and heroes lay a web of economic motivations. City-states minted coins to pay troops, fund public works, and secure trade routes. It was less about artistic legacy and more about economic survival. The coins were the building blocks of an ancient economy, the tools that enabled Greek city-states to thrive and expand. Yet, despite the pragmatism driving their creation, these coins became cherished artifacts, surviving millennia to tell their stories. They offer us a glimpse into the past, whispering tales of an era where art, politics, and economy intertwined in a delicate dance. They were in many ways the tweets of the ancient world, brief yet potent messages that conveyed identity, ambition, and power. Each coin was a statement, a claim, a declaration of existence in a world where being seen was as crucial as being heard. So, the next time you find yourself digging for change in your pocket, think of those ancient Greeks. Their coins were not just currency. They were the original status updates, the ancient equivalent of a retweet, spreading the word of their city-state with every transaction. They were the silent storytellers, the unsung heroes of history, carrying the weight of their world in their tiny metal forms. As the classical period unfolded, Greek coins continued to evolve, becoming ever more intricate and detailed, laying the groundwork for the complex tapestry of history that would follow. As the intricate artistry of Greek coinage reached its zenith, the narrative was about to take a sharp turn. Enter the Romans, stage left, ready to steal the show like uninvited karaoke singers at a toga party. The Romans, with their legions and legacies, weren't just about conquering lands. They were all about conquering economies too. And boy, did they bring a new economic script to the ancient world, one that tossed Greek coinage into a tailspin quicker than you could say denarius. You see, by the time the Romans rolled up their metaphorical sleeves in Greece, the days of the iconic Athenian owl were numbered. Roman coins, like the denarius, started flooding the Greek markets around the 2nd century BCE. Imagine it like a tidal wave of Roman metal washing over the Greek economy, drowning out the old tunes of drachmas and staters. The Romans were like the new kids in town who brought their own currency to the party, and let's just say their coins were about as welcome as a cat at a dog show. Now, you've got to picture the chaos. Greek economists must have been tearing out their hair, ancient ledgers scattering like confetti. Inflation was the name of the game, as the market became saturated with these new Roman coins. It was like trying to inflate a balloon with a hole in it. No matter how much they puffed, the value just seeped out. It's said that by the time the 1st century BCE rolled around, the Greek economy was feeling the pinch harder than a pair of too tight sandals, thanks to this influx of Roman currency. And then there was the myth of Hellenistic nostalgia. Nostalgia, the romantic yearning for the good old days. The Greeks had it bad, longing for their own coins like someone missing their trusty flip phone in a smartphone world. They yearned for the days when their coins were not just currency, but cultural icons, tiny ambassadors of Greek artistry and identity. It's as if, at every agora gathering, you could hear murmurs of "remember when," echoing among the olive stalls. But this nostalgia wasn't just about sentimentality. It had real economic consequences. As Roman coins dominated the scene, some clever Greeks decided to take matters into their own hands, quite literally. Enter the black market. Greeks began trading their cherished old coins under the table, like a secret society of numismatic rebels. They tucked away stashes of drachmas and staters, holding onto them not just as currency, but as cultural relics. These coins became more than mere metal. They were symbols of resistance, a middle finger to the Roman economic machine. And speaking of middle fingers, let's talk about the clever ways Greeks adapted. While some clung to their old coins like heirlooms, others took a more pragmatic approach. They started mixing Roman coins with their own in trade, a kind of economic cocktail that would make any ancient accountant wince. It was a clever way to hedge their bets, ensuring they weren't left holding the proverbial bag when the economic winds shifted. Yet, it wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience. Greeks had always been known for their ingenuity, and this economic upheaval was no exception. They found ways to keep their culture alive, even as Roman influence seeped into every corner of their world. It's a testament to their flexibility and tenacity, qualities that have kept their legacy afloat through the tides of history. But let's not put too much gloss on it. The harsh reality was that the Greek economy was struggling, and the Roman coins were partly to blame. Inflation, devaluation, and economic instability were the new norm, and the Greek city-states found themselves increasingly at the mercy of Roman economic policies. It was like being caught in a financial riptide, with little choice but to swim along and hope for the best. In this tumultuous time, the romantic myths of Greek coinage became both a comfort and a curse. They reminded the Greeks of their past glories, yes, but they also highlighted how far they had fallen. It was a bittersweet symphony playing in the background of a once mighty civilization, now relegated to the status of a Roman province. And yet, the story doesn't end here. The Greek spirit, much like their coins, would continue to shine through the ages, leaving an indelible mark on history. The Romans may have brought their coins, but they couldn't take away the legacy of Greek innovation and resilience. That, dear friends, is a tale for another time, as we unravel the next chapter of this ancient economic saga. Just as the Romans couldn't snuff out the Greek spirit, neither could they erase the legacy of those ancient coins. Even as Roman denarii flooded the markets, the echoes of Greek coinage continued to clink through the corridors of time. These coins, tiny as they were, spoke volumes about the human condition, our endless chase for wealth, our insatiable desire for power, and our perpetual quest to leave a mark on the world, even if that mark was no bigger than a drachma. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. How did these ancient coins shape the world we know today? For starters, they laid the groundwork for modern economics. Before coins, the economy was like a chaotic yard sale with no price tags. Enter the Greeks with their shiny discs, and suddenly there was a standardized system, a kind of economic GPS that could guide transactions across vast distances and disparate cultures. It's no exaggeration to say that these coins were the Bitcoin of their time, minus the blockchain and the Elon Musk tweets. The Greeks also pioneered the idea of imprinting national identity onto currency, a tradition that stuck around like a stubborn piece of gum on your shoe. Their coins were more than just metal. They were miniature billboards, broadcasting the values and achievements of the city-states that minted them. This notion of using currency as cultural and political propaganda is something we still see today. Just glance at the faces on your own cash, the presidents, the queens, the historical landmarks. It's all part of a long lineage that traces back to those ancient Greek artisans who turned pocket change into a canvas for national pride. And let's not forget the profound impact Greek coinage had on trade. By creating a standardized currency, the Greeks turned the Mediterranean into an ancient superhighway of commerce. Greek coins were circulated far and wide, from the markets of Egypt to the bazaars of Persia. They acted like economic passports, facilitating trade and interaction between cultures that might otherwise have remained isolated. This interconnectivity not only boosted economic prosperity, but also fostered cultural exchange, laying the foundations for the cosmopolitan world we enjoy today. But before we get too misty-eyed about these ancient coins, let's bust a few myths. The romantic notion that Greek coinage was all about art and culture is a tad rose-tinted. Sure, the coins were beautiful, but they were also tools of control. City-states used them to project power, levy taxes, and fund armies. They were the ancient equivalent of a military budget wrapped up in a shiny package. The coins may have been adorned with owls and horses, but behind those designs was a gritty reality of economics and politics. And speaking of gritty realities, let's take a cheeky detour into the world of modern coin collectors, cryptocurrency enthusiasts. Picture it, the ancient Greek coin collector, carefully examining a freshly minted drachma, and the modern crypto enthusiast, obsessively checking the rise and fall of Bitcoin. Both are driven by the same desire, to own a piece of the future. The Greeks hoarded coins as symbols of wealth and status, much like how today's crypto traders hold on to their digital assets, dreaming of untold riches. It's a tale as old as time, with humans forever chasing new forms of currency like moths to a flame. And while we're on the topic of chasing, let's talk about status. Coins were the Instagram of the ancient world, a way to flaunt your wealth without saying a word. The more coins you had, the louder your social media presence, if you will. People flashed their wealth with coins, as they do today with luxury cars or designer clothes. It's the eternal human quest for recognition, whether you're plastering your face on a coin or perfecting your selfie game on Instagram. In the end, coins are more than just currency. They are storytellers. They reveal the ambitions, the innovations, and the absurdities of the societies that minted them. Each coin is a snapshot of history, capturing the essence of a time and place in a way that no text or artifact can. They show us that while the trappings of wealth may change, the human pursuit of status remains the same. Whether it's ancient Greek drachmas or modern cryptocurrencies, we're all just trying to leave our mark, to be remembered, to matter. As we wrap up our journey through the world of ancient Greek coinage, let's reflect on what these little metal discs have taught us. They've shown us the power of innovation, the importance of identity, and the relentless drive of human ambition. They've reminded us that behind every currency is a story of power, of survival, of creativity. And as we continue to evolve, creating new forms of currency and new ways of trading, it's worth remembering that the core of it all remains unchanged. The human desire to connect, to trade, to thrive. So next time you toss a coin into a fountain or check the latest crypto prices, spare a thought for those ancient Greeks. They may have left the stage long ago, but their legacy jingles on in our pockets and on our screens. In the grand drama of history, they were the original influencers, teaching us that even the smallest coin can carry the weight of a civilization. And on that note, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Greeks, the pioneers of pocket change, who showed us that sometimes the biggest stories come in the smallest packages. Cheers to the eternal dance of wealth and ambition, the age-old quest for the perfect balance between art, economy, and identity. In the cradle of civilization, where writing first scratched the surface of clay tablets and kings fancied themselves as deities, there was an audacious architectural spectacle, ziggurats, the ancient skyscrapers of Mesopotamia. Think of them as the ancestral great-great-grandparents of today's skyscrapers, only without elevators or a Starbucks in the lobby. Standing proud in the dusty plains of what is now modern-day Iraq, these monolithic structures soared above the landscape, a tangible testament to human ambition and a little bit of divine brown-nosing. Take the great ziggurat of Ur, for instance. Built around 2100 BCE under the reign of King Urnammu, this colossal step pyramid was a whopping 64 feet tall, which might not seem like much compared to the Burj Khalifa, but for its time, it was the equivalent of building a house of cards on a windy day. This mammoth structure was constructed using mud bricks, which, spoiler alert, aren't known for their longevity. Yet here we are, thousands of years later, still marveling at the audacity of it all. The great ziggurat wasn't just a vanity project for the king. No, it served as a stairway to heaven, quite literally. The ziggurat was dedicated to Nana, the moon god, and acted as a meeting place between the divine and mortal realms. At the top, a temple perched like a cherry on a Sunday, where priests would perform rituals and probably engage in a bit of celestial schmoozing. It was a blend of spiritual fervor and political pageantry. After all, nothing says I'm in charge, quite like claiming direct access to the gods. Building such a behemoth without cranes, bulldozers, or even a decent cup of coffee was no small feat. Thousands of workers, likely conscripted subjects, labored under the scorching sun to stack millions of mud bricks. This was an operation that required not just brawn but brains. Imagine the logistical nightmare, calculating angles, ensuring stability, and not running out of bricks. It's the kind of project management that would make even the most seasoned modern architect break into a cold sweat. And let's talk about those mud bricks for a moment. In a land where trees were as rare as a quiet moment in a preschool, wood was not an option. Instead, they used what they had in abundance, mud and straw. It was a recycling dream, except when it rained. The bricks were sun-dried and laid in bitumen, a naturally occurring tar, which was used like a prehistoric version of superglue to keep everything together. It worked surprisingly well, all things considered, although it's safe to say that a good storm could ruin your whole day. The construction of the ziggurat was as much about divine devotion as it was about social control. By organizing large swaths of the population into a cohesive workforce, the rulers of Mesopotamia were able to exert their power and reinforce their status. It was a priestly PR campaign wrapped in a religious fervor, where divine favor was conveniently aligned with the king's earthly agenda. You scratch the deity's back, and the deity scratches yours, or so the story goes. But why go to all the trouble? Well, in a time when the next empire over could come knocking with swords and not-so-subtle demands, a display of architectural prowess was as much a deterrent as it was a declaration of faith. It was a stone-faced statement saying, "We have the resources to build this, so imagine what else we can do." And it worked, at least until the next empire came along with bigger swords and even grander building ambitions. Yet, despite their impressive stature and religious significance, ziggurats were not the bustling centers of activity one might expect. They were more like exclusive clubs for the elite priests and kings. The average Mesopotamian probably never set foot on its sacred stairs. Instead, they would gaze up from below, perhaps wondering if the gods ever got tired of all the rituals, or if they really did have a direct line to their celestial counterparts. In the end, the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia were more than just architectural feats. They were symbols of a civilization reaching for the heavens, not just to touch the divine, but to showcase their prowess, unity, and yes, a bit of their hubris. They remind us of humanity's enduring desire to build, to connect, and to leave a mark on history, even if that mark is made of mud bricks and dreams of touching the sky. Now, let's shift our focus a bit from those towering ziggurats and step into the bustling streets of ancient Babylon. Yes, the Babylon of Hanging Gardens fame, but we'll get to that leafy enigma in a moment. First, let's talk about how Babylon wasn't just a one-hit wonder in the ancient world. This city was the ultimate urban planning flex, with an organization that would make even the most meticulous modern city planner shed a tear of joy or envy. Picture Babylon around 600 BCE, during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar Roman II. This wasn't just a city, it was an urban jungle, complete with its own ancient version of a master plan. Think grid-like streets, districts devoted to specific trades, and yes, even a rudimentary form of zoning. This was no chaotic sprawl. It was a well-oiled machine of a metropolis, designed to keep the gears of commerce, religion, and politics turning smoothly. If you think zoning laws are a modern invention, think again. Babylon had its own version, keeping noisy metalworking far from the peaceful residential areas. where citizens could enjoy their ancient equivalent of a quiet Sunday brunch. Now, let's talk mud bricks, our old friends from the ziggurat days, still pulling their weight in this urban marvel. Making mud bricks was the bread and butter of Mesopotamian construction, but it wasn't just dirt and straw thrown together by chance. No, this was a full-blown industry, with economic repercussions that rippled through society. Producing these bricks required a workforce, often corralled from the lower echelons of society, who toiled away with little more than their bare hands and a prayer for overcast skies. It's estimated that constructing a major structure could require upwards of 5 million bricks. Talk about a labor-intensive process. The economics of mud brick manufacturing had its own supply chain, long before anyone coined the term. Workers collected mud from the riverbanks, mixed it with straw, and shaped it into bricks that were then sun-baked to a crisp. This was the ancient version of a factory line, with the production of bricks creating jobs, stimulating trade for straw and bitumen, and contributing to the local economy. It was a mudslinging operation in the most literal sense, with each brick representing a tiny cog in the grand machine of Babylonian society. But why all this investment in mud and clay? Enter the city's famous walls, a testament to both political prowess and a paranoid ruler's quest for security. Nebuchadnezzar Roman II didn't just want a city, he wanted a fortress, a citadel that screamed, "I'm in charge, and you'd better not forget it." The walls of Babylon were not merely defensive structures, they were a political statement. Rising reportedly over 40 feet, with a thickness that would give modern fortifications a run for their money, these walls were a massive deterrent to any would-be invader or insurrectionist. The walls weren't just about keeping enemies out, they were about keeping the peace within. They were a constant reminder of the king's power, a looming presence in the lives of Babylon's citizens. It's one thing to build a city, it's another to make sure it stays yours. In an age where betrayal and backstabbing were as common as a clay tablet, Nebuchadnezzar needed every advantage he could get. And nothing says, "Don't mess with me," quite like a wall that could double as a highway. Now, let's tackle the elephant, or should we say, the garden in the room, the hanging gardens of Babylon. Ah, the legendary terraces of greenery, cascading like a verdant waterfall, or so the story goes. Here's where we must don our myth-busting hats. Despite the romantic allure, there's a bit of a hiccup in the historical record. No concrete archaeological evidence has ever been found to confirm their existence. It's like the Bigfoot of ancient architecture, captivating, mysterious, and probably not real. The tale of the Hanging Gardens comes from later Greek historians, who were known for their penchant for embellishment. According to them, these gardens were built by Nebuchadnezzar Roman II for his homesick wife, Amades, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. Sweet story, right? But let's face it, without any tangible proof, it remains a tantalizing mix of fact, fiction, and wishful thinking. The closest we get is a mention in the writings of Barter, a Babylonian priest who lived centuries after Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Even he seems a bit sketchy on the details. So, were they real? Perhaps not in the way we've been led to believe, but their legend speaks volumes about human nature's love for a good story. Whether the gardens were a real Eden or just a figment of historical imagination, they've captured our collective curiosity for millennia. And maybe that's their true power, not in the bricks or roots, but in the narrative that's outlasted the city itself. As we sift through the dustbins of history, it's clear that Babylon was much more than its myths. It was a city of innovation, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, wrapped in mud brick walls and shrouded in stories. Its legacy is not just in what was built, but in the dreams it inspired and the tales it left behind. In the end, Babylon reminds us that while cities may crumble, the stories they birth endure, shaping our understanding of the past and fueling our imagination of what once was. And so, we continue our journey into this world of ancient wonders, knowing that the past is a place where reality and legend dance a complicated, yet fascinating, waltz. So, as we leave behind the allure of Babylonian myths, let's dive deeper into the laborious grandeur of Mesopotamian temples and palaces. These were not your run-of-the-mill places of worship or royal residences. No, these structures were the ancient world's version of "look what I can do, and I've got more guards in my corner than you do." Talk about a real estate power play. First, let's set the scene with the temples, the spiritual nerve centers of Mesopotamia. At the heart of these sacred sites were the temple complexes, which were sprawling compounds that made the Vatican look like a cozy airband. The main attraction, the massive temple itself, often a ziggurate's less flashy sibling, built to house the deity's earthly residence. These temples were architectural marvels in their own right, though they may have lacked the ziggurate's vertical ambition. They were decked out with courtyards, storage rooms, and sometimes even a sacred grove, probably the Mesopotamian version of a divine backyard garden. Constructing these temples required a small army of workers. Forget weekends off or a 9-to-5 schedule. These folks were in it for the long haul, often conscripted as part of their civic duty, or, because the king said so. The workforce was a mishmash of skilled artisans, laborers, and anyone unlucky enough to be caught loafing around when the foreman came calling. It was like a never-ending team-building exercise, minus the trust falls and post-work cocktails. Let's talk materials. While mud bricks were still the MVPs of Mesopotamian construction, the temples often got the deluxe treatment with fired bricks and stone was no minor investment. Mesopotamia wasn't exactly teeming with quarries, so getting your hands on quality stone was akin to importing luxury cars, pricey and guaranteed to make your neighbor seethe with envy. Transporting these materials required an elaborate logistical ballet involving boats, carts, and a lot of elbow grease. It was a supply chain that would make Amazon blush. But the temples weren't just about the divine. They were also about the Benjamins, well, the shekels, to be precise. The temple complexes often doubled as economic hubs where significant portions of the region's wealth were managed. They stored grain, collected taxes, and even housed workshops. It was a divine piggy bank, with priests acting as ancient accountants, ensuring the guards, and the king, got their due. The temple economy was a crucial cog in the Mesopotamian machine, a reminder that even in matters of faith, money talks. Now veer your eyes towards the palaces, those sprawling monuments to monarchical hubris. Mesopotamian palaces were less about subtlety and more about showcasing power with a capital P. Think grand halls, expansive courtyards, and enough bling to make even the most ostentatious monarch feel a bit gauche. These were not merely homes, they were statements. I'm the king, and I live like one. Also, I have more rooms than you. The manpower required to build these palaces was staggering. Estimates suggest that constructing a royal palace could involve thousands of workers over several years. Picture a rolling sea of humanity, all laboring under the sun, driven by the promise of a few crumbs from the king's table, or more accurately, not being on the receiving end of his wrath. The palaces were constructed using the finest materials available, imported from far-off lands. Cedar from Lebanon, for instance, was a favorite, its aromatic presence lending an air of exoticism and wealth. It was a status symbol as much as it was a construction choice, a way to say, I'm so powerful, I can afford imported wood. And then there were the walls, the canvas for the king's version of Instagram. Reliefs and carvings adorned the palace walls, turning them into a visual narrative of the king's might and divine favor. These masterpieces weren't mere decoration. They were the ancient world's propaganda posters, broadcasting the king's exploits and divine blessings to anyone within viewing distance. Lions were a popular motif, symbolizing the king's strength and prowess. Apparently, nothing says, don't mess with me, like a few dozen stone lions watching your every move. But all that artistry came with a side of spin. Sure, those wall carvings depicted grand victories and divine favor, but let's not forget they were essentially curated content. The king's PR team, aka the palace artisans, had a vested interest in making sure the narrative stayed favorable. It was the equivalent of a highlight reel, showing off the wins while conveniently leaving out the losses. The artistry was undeniable, but so was the agenda. After all, history is written by the victors, or in this case, etched in stone by them. These grand projects weren't just about aesthetics or divine devotion. They were a reflection of power dynamics. The ability to marshal resources, organize labor, and execute complex architectural feats was a testament to the ruler's control over his domain. It was a not-so-subtle reminder of who held the keys to the kingdom, and by extension, the keys to the afterlife. But what about the common folk, the everyday Mesopotamians who lived in the shadow of these grand monuments? While the temples and palaces stood as testaments to the ruler's power, most people lived in far humbler abodes. Mud brick houses were the norm, modest single-story structures that lacked the grandeur of their royal neighbours. These homes were a far cry from the opulence of the palace, but they were practical, serving as shelter and workspace in one. Yet, despite the disparities, there was a certain egalitarian element to the construction process. While the rulers may have dictated the grand designs, it was the collective effort of the people that brought them to life. Each brick laid, each stone carved, was a small but vital contribution to the grand tapestry of Mesopotamian civilization. It was a reminder that even in a world dominated by divine kings and celestial mandates, the true power lay in the hands of the many. As we continue to explore the architectural wonders of Mesopotamia, it's clear that these ancient structures were more than just bricks and mortar. They were the embodiment of a society's values, aspirations, and perhaps a bit of unbridled ambition. So next time you gaze upon a towering skyscraper or a sprawling palace, remember the ancient architects of Mesopotamia, who built their dreams into the very fabric of history, one mud brick at a time. As we trudge through the mud brick streets of ancient Mesopotamia, let's shift our gaze from the towering palaces and ziggurats to the less glamorous, albeit equally significant, veins of the civilization, its canals and aqueducts. These waterworks were the unsung heroes of Mesopotamian life, quietly sustaining urban sprawl and agricultural abundance. Imagine a sprawling network of watery highways, without the GPS, but with plenty of mud, sustaining the lifeblood of the empire. The Mesopotamians, clever as they were, understood that water was the secret source to a thriving civilization. We're talking about a landscape where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were the Bay and Say and Jay-Z of the natural world, powerful, unpredictable, and capable of making or breaking your day. If you wanted to avoid a dry season disaster or a wet season washout, you needed to get those rivers on your side. And so, they built canals, lots of them. By the time Hammurabi was setting down his code in the 18th century BCE, there were approximately 1,000 miles of canals crisscrossing the region. That's like driving from New York City to Miami, except you're floating along in a reed boat, hoping it doesn't spring a leak. These waterways were feats of engineering that would make even the most tech-savvy modern engineer tip their hard hat in respect. The canals were essentially artificial rivers, meticulously dug with basic tools and a ton of manpower. Their purpose was twofold: irrigation and transport. For the agrarian society of Mesopotamia, irrigation was the name of the game. Without it, those fields of barley and emmer wheat would be as barren as a college student's fridge during finals week. The canals brought life-giving water into the heart of the fields, transforming arid plains into lush farmland. It's estimated that the use of irrigation increased agricultural output by up to 50%. This wasn't just about feeding the populace. It was about creating surplus, which meant trade, which meant wealth. Trade, of course, was the other side of the canal coin. The canals allowed goods to be transported efficiently, transforming cities like Uruk and Babylon into bustling centers of commerce. Picture this: traders navigating their wares down these water highways, their flat-bottomed boats laden with everything from textiles to grain to the occasional sheep. It was like the ancient version of Amazon Prime, but with fewer delivery drones and more donkeys. But before you imagine an idyllic scene of peaceful water journeys, let's sprinkle a little reality on that dream. Maintaining these canals was a Herculean task. They required constant upkeep to prevent silting, which, if left unchecked, could turn your precious waterway into a glorified mud pit. The labor needed to dig, maintain, and occasionally redirect these canals was immense. Entire communities were often conscripted into canal duty, and this wasn't exactly a cushy gig. It was back-breaking work under the unforgiving sun, where the only thing keeping you going was the promise of a meager share of the crops you were watering. And let's not forget the political machinations that came with such infrastructure. Control of the canals meant control of the water supply, and by extension, control of the agricultural bounty. It's no surprise that disputes over water rights were as common as mud in Mesopotamia. Kings and local rulers used water management as a tool of both benevolence and coercion. Help dig this canal, and you'll have water for your crops. Refuse, and enjoy a dry season of dust and despair. It was Machiavellian politics before Machiavelli even had a quill to write with. But canals weren't the only game in town. Enter the aqueducts, the high-flying cousins of the lowly canal. These engineering marvels were designed to transport water over long distances and uneven terrain. Unlike the Roman aqueducts you might be picturing, Mesopotamian aqueducts were less about arches and more about elevation. They used a series of raised channels and tunnels to carry water across the landscape, ensuring that even the most desolate outposts could quench their thirst. One of the most famous examples is the aqueduct at Jerwan, built around 690 BCE by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. This stone structure stretched over 30 miles, channeling water from the mountains to the capital city of Nineveh. It was an audacious project, involving the transport of massive stone blocks, each weighing several tons. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a moon landing, ambitious, expensive, and a tad risky. The aqueduct was more than just a water pipeline. It was a statement of power and technological prowess, a way for Sennacherib to say, "Look what I can do with a little stone and a lot of labor." Now, let's descend from the lofty heights of aqueducts back to the ground level, where the social dynamics of Mesopotamian life played out in the architecture of everyday living. While the kings and priests lived in opulent palaces and temple complexes, the average Mesopotamian called a humble mud-brick house home. These squat, single-story dwellings were often clustered together in tight-knit neighborhoods, a far cry from the sprawling estates of the elite. But within these modest walls, the true fabric of society was woven. You see, architecture of these homes reflected not only the social hierarchy, but also the communal nature of Mesopotamian life. Houses were built around central courtyards, which served as the family's primary living space. It was in these courtyards that daily life unfolded, meals were cooked, crafts were made, and children played. Privacy wasn't exactly a priority. Instead, the focus was on communal living, on sharing resources and responsibilities with your neighbors. It was a bit like a pre-Babel version of a co-op apartment, minus the board meetings and hefty maintenance fees. But don't let the simplicity of these homes fool you. Within their unassuming walls, the seeds of innovation were planted. With limited interior space, Mesopotamians became masters of multitasking. Rooms served multiple purposes: storage by day, sleeping quarters by night. The rooftops were flat and accessible, doubling as extra living space during the cooler evening hours. It was utilitarian, sure, but also efficient, a testament to the resourcefulness of a people who had to make do with what they had. Yet, despite the relative simplicity of their homes, the average Mesopotamian's life was inextricably linked to the grand structures that loomed over their cities. The temples and palaces were not just places of worship or governance. They were the economic and social hubs of the community. Festivals, markets, and civic gatherings all revolved around these monumental spaces, drawing the populace together in a shared experience of culture, commerce, and religion. And therein lies the beauty of Mesopotamian architecture. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar, but about the interconnectedness of society. Whether through the grand canal systems that fed the fields or the humble homes that sheltered families, architecture was the thread that bound the civilization together. It was a reflection of the values, aspirations, and daily realities of a people who, despite the odds, built a world that continues to capture our imagination. So, as we meander through the dusty alleyways of history, let's remember that the story of Mesopotamia is not just written in the stones of its ziggurats or the walls of its palaces, but in the silent flow of its waterways and the whispered stories of its people. It's a narrative of innovation and ambition, of a civilization that dared to shape the world around it, one mud-brick and one canal at a time. And as we prepare to delve further into this ancient saga, it's clear that the past still has plenty of secrets to share. In the grand tapestry of human history, the story of Mesopotamian architecture weaves a particularly vivid thread, shimmering with tales of ambition, ingenuity, and a touch of hubris. It's a legacy that speaks to the very heart of what it means to be human, the relentless drive to build something that outlasts us, even if it's just a pile of sun-baked mud bricks. So, let's take a step back and consider how these ancient marvels have shaped the world that followed, leaving a footprint as enduring as a ziggurate's shadow on the Mesopotamian plain. It's no secret that later civilizations borrowed heavily from the Mesopotamian playbook. The Egyptians, for instance, took one look at the ziggurates and thought, "Not bad, but we can do better." Cue the pyramids of Giza, colossal structures that make even the great ziggurat of Ur seem like a quaint country cottage by comparison. Yet the fundamental idea was the same. Reach for the heavens, assert authority, and maybe impress a god or two along the way. The Egyptians, however, had the advantage of limestone and a workforce that probably didn't include a union rep, allowing them to build monuments that, unlike their Mesopotamian predecessors, could withstand the test of time and weather. Fast forward to ancient Greece, and you'll find echoes of Mesopotamian urban planning. The Greeks were all about symmetry and order, concepts that Mesopotamians had dabbled in with their grid-like city layouts, while the Greeks added their own flair, marble columns and amphitheaters, anyone. The underlying principles of organized urban spaces and communal centers can trace a dusty trail back to the bustling streets of Babylon. It's a testament to the power of a good blueprint, one that whispers through the ages, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Of course, no discussion of Mesopotamian influence would be complete without a nod to the Romans, those architectural magpies who took a bit from everyone and made it their own. While they may not have built ziggurats, their love affair with concrete, arches, and aqueducts has more than a hint of Mesopotamian inspiration. They understood, like the Sumerians before them, that water was the lifeblood of civilization. The Roman aqueducts, with their majestic arches and engineering genius, were the great-great-grandchildren of the humble Mesopotamian canals, proving that good ideas, like good wine, only get better with age. But what about the myths? The romantic tales of hanging gardens and divine stairways. They're the stuff of legend, and in some ways that's their enduring power. The stories of Mesopotamia have captivated the human imagination for millennia, not because they were always true, but because they speak to something deeper, a yearning for connection, for meaning, for something greater than ourselves. The hanging gardens may never have existed in the way we're told, but their legend has inspired generations to dream of paradise on earth, of nature reclaimed in the heart of the city. Yet, as we marvel at these ancient stories, it's crucial to remember the realities they sometimes obscure. The grandeur of Mesopotamian architecture was built on the backs of countless workers, toiling under the sun without the luxury of safety gear or a lunch break. These were people whose names history has forgotten, whose sweat and sacrifice made the dreams of kings a reality. It's a sobering reminder that the monuments of the past, like the skyscrapers of today, often come at a human cost. Despite their eventual decline, thanks to a combination of shifting climates, warring neighbors, and the inexorable march of time, the architectural achievements of Mesopotamia continue to resonate. They remind us of our shared humanity, our common desire to leave a mark, to create something that says, we were here. In that sense, the legacy of Mesopotamian architecture is less about the buildings themselves and more about the spirit of innovation they embody. It's a legacy that transcends bricks and mortar, speaking to the eternal human urge to dream big, to build boldly, and to imagine a future that rises above the horizon. So, as you gaze upon the towering structures of the modern world, remember that their roots stretch back through the sands of time to the Fertile Crescent, where the first architects dared to dream of touching the sky. Mesopotamia's architectural legacy is a testament to the enduring power of human creativity, a reminder that, even in a world of transience, our dreams can carve out a space in history. And who knows, perhaps one day, future civilizations will look at our achievements with the same mix of awe and curiosity, wondering at the stories we leave behind, etched not in stone, but in the imagination of those who come next. In a land where the term Game of Thrones was less about dragons and more about surviving the political minefield that was ancient Mesopotamia, we find ourselves in the chaotic swirl of city-states like Ur and Uruk around 2334 BCE. The Fertile Crescent, an ironically named strip where life was as much about dodging spears as it was about growing crops, was no paradise. Here, local rulers were as plentiful as the grains of sand in the desert, each vying for a slice of power that would put modern corporate ladder climbers to shame. Enter Sargon, the man who would become known as the king of the four corners of the world. But hold your horses before you start picturing him as some kind of ancient superhero. Sargon began life in a decidedly unkingly fashion, as a cupbearer. Now, before you dismiss this as a fancy title for a medieval bartender. The role of cupbearer was actually a big deal. In the volatile climate of Mesopotamian politics, a cupbearer was a trusted advisor, someone who had the king's ear, literally. It's like being the CEO's personal assistant, but with more wine and fewer emails. So, how did a man of such humble beginnings manage to turn the tables on his overlords and unite the notoriously fractious city-states? Well, first, let's talk about those city-states. You've got and Uruk, both significant players in the region. Each city-state was a self-contained fortress with its own ruler, its own guards, and its own agenda. The political scene was about as stable as a three-legged chair, and alliances were as fleeting as a Snapchat story. One day you're shaking hands. The next, you're at war over a few acres of fertile land or control of a trade route. Economically, the incentives for empire building were clear as day. Mesopotamia was a crossroads. The ancient equivalent of a highway rest stop for traders from places like Anatolia and the Indus Valley. Whoever controlled these routes controlled the wealth. It's no wonder everyone was scrambling for power. But controlling trade meant more than just stacking up silver and barley. It was about survival. With resources scarce and rivalries fierce, unity was less about harmony and more about not getting your city-state wiped off the map. Now, let's get back to our friend Sargon. His rise to power is the stuff of legend, and like all good legends, it's shrouded in a bit of mystery and a lot of bravado. According to the Sargon legend, he was set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates by his mother, a priestess, no less, and rescued by a gardener. If this sounds suspiciously like another famous basket-born baby, it's because stories have a way of traveling just like those ancient traders. The real Sargon, however, was more about strategy than divine intervention. Sargon took advantage of the chaos of the city-states and overturned the existing power structures with the kind of audacity that would make a modern startup founder blush. He started by taking control of Kish, a city that was a key player in the region, and used it as a springboard to conquer the rest of Mesopotamia. His military tactics were a mix of brute force and clever diplomacy. Think of it as the carrot-and-stick approach, but with more chariots and fewer PowerPoint slides. His unification of the region wasn't just a political triumph, it was an economic masterstroke. By consolidating control, Sargon was able to streamline trade and stabilize the region, which in turn filled his coffers and kept his soldiers loyal. The Akkadian Empire under Sargon became a powerhouse, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, a feat that would have Instagram influencers green with envy. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur of Sargon's empire. The title King of the Four Corners of the World sounds mighty impressive, but in reality, ruling such a vast and diverse territory was like herding cats. Sure, he had the bling and the bragging rights, but maintaining control required constant vigilance and a knack for quelling rebellions before they could gain traction. It's a bit like trying to keep a group chat civil when everyone's got a strong opinion and a poor Wi-Fi connection. And so, as Sargon carved out his empire, he also carved out his legacy. He set the standard for what it meant to be an emperor in the ancient world, a mix of military prowess, strategic marriages, and a hefty dose of luck. His success was a testament to the power of ambition and the allure of empire building, but also a reminder of the fragility of power. Empires rise and fall, after all, and Sargon's would be no exception. In the end, Sargon's story is one of transformation, a humble cupbearer who dared to dream big and change the world. His journey from obscurity to the annals of history is a testament to the unpredictability of human ambition and the ever-turning wheel of fortune. As we continue to explore the Akkadian Empire, keep in mind that behind every grand title and majestic empire is a human story, one that echoes across the ages with lessons and legacies that continue to resonate today. Now, let's shift gears and zoom in on Sargon's military strategies, the economic engine purring under the hood of his empire, and the social glue that held it all together. Picture Sargon not just as a conqueror, but as the CEO of a startup called Akkadia Inc., a venture that ambitiously expanded across approximately 800 kilometers of prime Mesopotamian real estate. Not bad for someone who started as a glorified wine waiter, right? Sargon's military was like the ancient world's Swiss Army knife, versatile, efficient, and just as likely to get you out of a tight spot. He didn't just rely on brute force. His secret sauce was a blend of tactical innovation and strategic alliances. His army was a well-oiled machine, boasting somewhere around 400 men, a formidable force in those days, when armies were often more of a neighborhood watch group with spears. This wasn't just any ragtag bunch. These soldiers were paid, professional, and fiercely loyal to their paycheck of silver and barley, a testament to the economic backbone that kept Sargon's war machine humming along. Now, onto the economic hustle. How did Sargon foot the bill for such an operation? Spoiler alert, war elephants weren't part of his arsenal, despite their later star status in ancient warfare. But if they had been, they would have set him back a pretty penny. Just to give you an idea, in later centuries, the cost of maintaining a single elephant could rival that of an entire platoon of soldiers. Instead, Sargon leaned on good old-fashioned trade and taxation. By controlling key trade routes, he ensured a steady flow of goods and wealth into the heart of his empire. Think of it as an ancient toll booth, where traders paid in goods and coin for safe passage, much like how we begrudgingly fork over cash at highway tolls today. Managing an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean wasn't all marching bands and victory parades. It was logistical gymnastics. Imagine coordinating supply lines over such distances without Google Maps or GPS. The key was a network of roads connecting major cities, facilitating not just troop movements, but also the flow of information. Messengers on horseback zipped along these routes, ensuring that orders from the top didn't get lost in translation or in transit. But it wasn't just logistics that Sargon had to worry about. He had to play the ultimate game of whack-a-mole, with rebellions popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The myth of Sargon as an invincible leader is certainly enticing, but the reality was more like a high-stakes game of chess. For every city that willingly fell in line, another was plotting its escape. The king of the four corners of the world may have had a fancy title, but he also had a to-do list that would make a modern-day project manager weep. Enter Sargon's social policies, the unsung heroes of his administration. To keep the empire from splintering faster than a cheap sandal in the desert, Sargon implemented policies designed to foster a sense of unity among his diverse subjects. He standardized the Akkadian language across his territories, a move with the kind of efficiency that would make any autocrat proud. It's as if he handed out Rosetta Stones like party favors, ensuring everyone spoke the same language, literally and figuratively. Sargon wasn't just a military tactician, he was a pioneer of early PR. By installing loyal governors in conquered cities and establishing a common legal framework, he crafted a narrative of inclusion. It was a bit like handing out participation trophies to city-states, making them feel like part of the winning team. Yet, despite his strategic brilliance, Sargon's reign was no utopia. The lure of rebellion was ever present, like a persistent itch you can't quite scratch. His empire was a patchwork quilt of cultures and loyalties, each with its own agenda. Maintaining stability was a delicate dance of diplomacy and deterrence, akin to keeping a pot from boiling over by occasionally lifting the lid. Sargon's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and practical governance. He set the bar for future rulers, proving that an empire's strength lay not just in its military might, but in its economic savvy and social cohesion. Yet, even as he carved his name into history, the reality of empire building was a reminder that power was as ephemeral as the desert wind. As we continue to unravel the tale of the Akkadian Empire, remember that behind every grand narrative is a complex web of human endeavor. Empires may rise and fall, but the lessons they leave behind endure, echoing through the corridors of time. Stay tuned, because Sargon's story is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the most tumultuous, is yet to come. As the curtain rises yet again on the Akkadian stage, we find ourselves in the midst of a cultural renaissance that would make even the most jaded hipster nod approvingly. Sargon, ever the visionary, didn't just conquer lands, he conquered minds. Picture the Akkadian language spreading faster than a meme, becoming the lingua franca of a sprawling empire. It wasn't just about making sure everyone could order a drink in the same tongue. This linguistic unification was the glue holding Sargon's patchwork empire together. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing the power of words. This wasn't a Hallmark card empire. It was a logistical beast with the soul of a startup. The Akkadian language acted as the empire's operating system, streamlining communication across diverse cultures and reducing the administrative chaos to a manageable level. Well, as manageable as things can get when your primary writing tool is a lump of clay. Speaking of clay, let's talk about the cuneiform script, Mesopotamia's answer to the modern keyboard. Now, the romance of writing in cuneiform might conjure images of elegant scribes gently etching poetry into clay tablets. Reality check. It was more like carving your grocery list into a brick. Imagine trying to jot down a quick note when each letter is a labor-intensive wedge mark. Yet this was the cutting-edge tech of the day, a revolutionary leap forward from oral traditions to recorded history. It enabled not just the chronicling of royal decrees and trade transactions, but laid the groundwork for literature itself. Yes, the epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's first blockbuster, was penned in this arduous script. And while we're on the topic of innovation, let's take a detour down the dusty roads of Sargon's infrastructure projects. The Akkadian Empire wasn't just about military conquests and linguistic unity. It was also about connecting the dots, literally. Roads crisscrossing the empire were more than mere dirt paths. They were the veins through which the lifeblood of trade and communication flowed. If you controlled the roads, you controlled the empire, a fact Sargon understood all too well. But hold onto your horses, because we're not just talking about any old road here. These were the ancient equivalent of the interstate highway system, allowing for the swift movement of troops and goods across vast distances. They were the backbone of the empire's economic might and served as the arteries of administration, bringing distant territories under the watchful gaze of the central government. Imagine the thrill of riding down one of these roads at a breakneck pace, delivering messages that could shape the fate of cities. Now, imagine doing it without the benefit of a shock absorber. Truly, the ancient courier's life was not for the faint-hearted. Now, no discussion of Sargon's achievements would be complete without addressing the architectural wonders that punctuated his empire like exclamation points in the desert. Enter the ziggurats, stair-stepped temples that reached for the heavens. These were more than places of worship. They were statements of power and prestige. Each ziggurat was a towering testament to the empire's wealth and the king's divine right to rule. Think of them as the skyscrapers of their time, casting long shadows over the city-states they dominated. But as awe-inspiring as these structures were, let's not forget the unglamorous side of their construction. Erecting a ziggurat was no small feat. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. Imagine coordinating a workforce without project management software, relying instead on clay tablets to keep track of laborers, materials, and deadlines. It's enough to make you appreciate the simplicity of a modern spreadsheet. Yet, despite the challenges, these advancements helped solidify Sargon's legacy. The roads, the language, the cuneiform, and the ziggurats weren't just symbols of imperial grandeur. They were the practical foundations upon which the empire stood. They ensured that Sargon's influence would echo through the ages, even as the empire itself crumbled like a clay tablet dropped one too many times. As we marvel at these achievements, it's tempting to picture Sargon as a benevolent ruler, a kindly old grandpa guiding his empire with a steady hand. But let's not kid ourselves. Sargon was as savvy as they come, a ruler who understood that power was a double-edged sword. His innovations weren't just about making life better for his subjects. They were about consolidating his grip on power and outsmarting his rivals. So, while the Akkadian Empire eventually fell, its innovations endured, setting the stage for future civilizations to build upon. Sargon's legacy is a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit. As we continue to unravel the tale of this ancient empire, let's keep our eyes peeled for the lessons hidden within its ruins. Stay with me as we delve deeper into Sargon's world, where power was as much about perception as it was about reality, and where the echoes of his reign can still be heard today. The Akkadian Empire may have been a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of history, but its impact was anything but ephemeral. The story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be as thrilling as the last. As the sun set on Sargon's reign, the Akkadian Empire stood as a testament to ambition, an empire that had managed to wrangle the wild, untamable chaos of Mesopotamia into a semblance of order. But alas, No empire is invincible, and the Akkadians were about to learn this lesson the hard way. Sargon, the man who had redefined what it meant to be a ruler, left behind an empire teetering on the edge of precipice. And when he passed away around 2279 BCE, the metaphorical glue holding the empire together started to crack. In the grand tradition of powerful empires, the Akkadian Empire's decline was less about a dramatic collapse and more about a slow crumble. Picture a sandcastle being steadily eroded by the tide, each wave of external pressure and internal strife taking its toll. The first cracks in Sargon's legacy came from within. His successors, including his sons Rimush and Manishtushu, inherited not just a sprawling empire, but also a host of problems that would make even the most seasoned politician break out in a cold sweat. Rimush, Sargon's immediate successor, was the first to take a whack at ruling this unwieldy beast. He quickly discovered that being king of the four corners of the world was more like trying to juggle flaming torches on a unicycle. Rimush's reign was marked by constant rebellions, particularly from the southern city-states that chafed under Akkadian rule. It's as if the city-states had collectively decided that now was the perfect time to test the patience of their new ruler. Rimush managed to suppress these rebellions with the kind of brutal efficiency that would make a Roman general blush. But at what cost? Then came Manishtushu, who, despite having a name that sounds like a sneeze, was no pushover. He continued his brother's work of keeping the empire intact, but the challenges only grew. The empire was a patchwork quilt of cultures, each with its own priorities and grievances. Manishtushu's reign saw an uptick in economic pressures, with trade routes threatened by instability and the coffers running low. It's the kind of fiscal nightmare that would send any finance minister into a tailspin. And if internal strife wasn't enough, Mother Nature decided to throw her hat into the ring. The climate, which had been relatively stable during much of Sargon's reign, decided to take a turn for the worse. Droughts began to plague the region, turning once fertile lands into arid wastelands. When your entire empire is built on the promise of fertile land and abundant harvests, a drought is like a cruel joke with no punchline. Crops failed, food shortages followed, and the economic engine that had powered the Akkadian war machine began to sputter. Amidst this perfect storm of rebellion, economic woes, and environmental disaster, the Akkadian Empire began to buckle. But let's not get swept away by the romantic notion of divine retribution. The reality was far less mystical and far more mundane. The empire was simply overstretched. You can only conquer so many city-states before the logistics of managing them becomes a nightmare. Picture trying to run a multinational corporation with no emails, no phones, and a communication system that involves clay tablets and couriers. It's enough to make even the most tech-averse CEO long for the simplicity of a smartphone. Infighting among Sargon's descendants didn't help matters. As is often the case in dynasties, the question of succession became a breeding ground for conflict. Each heir had their own vision, or lack thereof, for the empire, and not all were cut from the same cloth as their legendary predecessor. The once unified front began to fracture, with each faction vying for control like kids squabbling over the last piece of candy. The irony here is almost Shakespearean. An empire built on conquest and unity dissolving into chaos and discord. Meanwhile, the myth of divine intervention loomed large in the popular imagination. Stories spread that the gods had turned against the Akkadians, a narrative that conveniently absolved human leaders of their incompetence and poor planning. It's a tale as old as time. When the going gets tough, blame the gods. But let's not kid ourselves. While the Akkadians might have been fervent believers in celestial justice, their downfall was more about human folly than heavenly wrath. And so, as the empire began to fragment, the city-states that had once been yoked under Akkadian rule started to reassert their independence. The Sumerians, ever the opportunists, took advantage of the empire's weakened state to regain some of their former glory. The Elamites, too, saw an opening and launched raids that further destabilized the region. It was as if the vultures had been circling, waiting for the perfect moment to swoop in. The decline of the Akkadian Empire is a stark reminder of the ephemeral nature of power. Sargon's empire was a marvel of its time, a testament to what ambition and audacity could achieve. Yet, like all empires, it was built on a foundation of sand. The economic and political realities that had once fueled its rise now hastened its fall. It's a story as old as civilization itself. The higher you climb, the farther you have to fall. As we continue to unravel this ancient tale, remember that the Akkadian Empire's decline wasn't a single cataclysmic event, but a series of unfortunate, albeit predictable, missteps. The Empire's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and the inevitable hubris of human endeavor. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the consequences of this decline and explore how it paved the way for new powers to rise from the ashes of Sargon's dream. The story isn't over yet, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. As the dust settled on the crumbling Akkadian Empire, the lessons of Sargon's spectacular rise and inevitable fall echoed through the corridors of time like a cautionary tale whispered by the ghosts of history. Sargon, the man who once wielded power with the ease of a seasoned puppeteer, had left a mark that would outlast the transient nature of his empire. His reign served as the blueprint for imperial governance, much like a prototype for the next generation of power-hungry rulers eager to etch their names in the annals of history. The Akkadian Empire, despite its eventual decline, was a game-changer in the way it approached the concept of centralized power. Sargon's model of governance, central authority bolstered by regional governors, became the gold standard for subsequent empires. It was as if he'd handed future rulers a cheat sheet on how to maintain control over diverse territories without losing their minds in the process. The notion of having a centralized authority that could delegate tasks effectively was revolutionary, akin to discovering the magic of delegation in today's corporate world. Picture this. Mesopotamia under Sargon was like a giant board game, with each city-state a square on the board. Unlike previous rulers who played with a scatterbrained approach, Sargon had a strategy, one that involved appointing loyal officials to oversee different regions. This was more than just a power play. It was a masterstroke of governance that ensured the empire didn't implode under the weight of its own ambitions. The legacy here was one of structural innovation, creating a framework that could withstand the whims of both human and natural forces. It's the kind of foresight that would make any modern-day CEO nod in approval. But let's not pretend that Sargon's empire was built on political savvy alone. The cultural impact of the Akkadians was profound, leaving a linguistic and artistic footprint that would shape the region for centuries. The Akkadian language didn't just unify the empire. It became the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, much like English in today's globalized world. This wasn't merely about communication. It was about identity and cultural cohesion. The Akkadian language was the connective tissue that held the empire together, a cultural glue that transcended political boundaries. The arts, too, flourished under Sargon's reign. The Akkadians were no slouches when it came to cultural contributions, producing art and literature that would endure long after the empire's political power had waned. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest literary masterpieces, found its origins in this fertile cultural landscape. It's a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, proof that while empires may rise and fall, the stories they leave behind are forever. Now, let's dip our toes into the murky waters of myth and reality. Sargon's legend, much like a well-crafted Instagram filter, painted him as a larger-than-life figure, part hero, part demigod. The tales of his humble beginnings, his rise from obscurity, and his divine favor were intoxicating narratives that later rulers would latch onto, using them as propaganda to legitimize their own claims to power. It's the ancient equivalent of name-dropping a celebrity to get into an exclusive club. Yet, beneath the myth was a man who understood the importance of perception. Sargon was a master of image management, crafting a persona that was as much about mythos as it was about realpolitik. The allure of Sargon's mythos wasn't lost on future empires. From the Assyrians to the Babylonians, the shadow of Sargon loomed large, a benchmark against which they measured their own achievements. Each successive power sought to emulate his conquests, adopt his administrative strategies, and harness the mystique of his legend. The Sargon effect, if you will, became a recurring theme in the storied saga of Mesopotamian history, a reminder that while empires may crumble, legends can endure. So, what can modern societies learn from Sargon's story? For starters, the balance of power is a precarious tightrope walk. Sargon's empire was a marvel of its time, but it was also a cautionary tale about the perils of overexpansion. His successors found themselves juggling more balls than they could handle, a scenario eerily reminiscent of today's global superpowers struggling with the complexities of international relations. The lesson here is clear. Ambition without foresight is a recipe for disaster. Moreover, Sargon's tale underscores the importance of adaptability. The Akkadian Empire thrived because it was able to evolve, integrating diverse cultures under a unified framework. In today's world, where cultural diversity is both a challenge and an asset, Sargon's model of governance holds valuable insights into how societies can thrive amidst complexity. As we wrap up our journey through the rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire, let's not forget the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise, empires fall, and the wheel of fortune continues to turn. The story of Sargon is a vivid reminder that the past is never truly past. It's a living, breathing entity that shapes the present and informs the future. And so, as we ponder the legacy of Sargon, let's conclude with a quote from the Sumerian king list, an ancient document that reminds us of the fleeting nature of power. Then kingship was lowered from heaven. It's a fitting end to our exploration, a reminder that while kings may come and go, their stories endure, etched into the fabric of history for generations to come. The Roman census. It sounds like a sleepy footnote in history, but hang on, because it's more like the original blockbuster bureaucratic nightmare. Back in the 6th century BCE, when Rome was just a scrappy city-state trying to make its mark, they decided counting people was a good idea. But before you get carried away with visions of toga-clad officials marking names on papyrus, let's set the record straight. This wasn't about knowing who was who. It was all about the cash. In those early days, the Roman census was less concerned with who might be lurking around the corner and more fixated on who was tossing coins into the communal pot. It was a tax collector's dream and a citizen's headache. The census was the Roman way of figuring out who owed what to whom, and it wasn't exactly the picture of precision. We're talking about a process where some poor soul had to traipse through the Roman countryside, armed with little more than a wax tablet and a determined frown. Of course, this wasn't just about collecting taxes, it was about power. The census was a tool to determine military service obligations. If you were counted, congratulations. You might find yourself conscripted into Rome's military machine, whether you liked it or not. And that's the thing, people didn't like it. Who could blame them? Being counted meant responsibility, and there was nothing romantic about being drafted into the legions or seeing your hard-earned coinage disappear into the empire's coffers. Now, the romantic image of Rome as a well-oiled, orderly machine is just that, a myth. The reality. Picture a chaotic scramble of miscommunication and human error. Early Roman administrators were like the original IT support, trying to make sense of a system no one fully understood, tools that were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. They didn't have Excel spreadsheets or calculators, just rudimentary math and a lot of guesswork. Let's not forget the political theater. The census was a chance for the Roman elite to flex their muscles, proving their worth not just in wealth but in influence. You see, the more wealth you had, the more votes you could wield in the assembly. So the census wasn't just counting sheep, it was counting power. The rich got richer, and the system kept them that way. It's a bit like your modern-day tax loopholes, only with more sandals and fewer lawyers. And speaking of sandals, those early census takers had their work cut out for them. Imagine trekking through rough terrain, visiting every villa and hovel, trying to convince skeptical farmers that yes, it really was in their best interest to declare their assets. It wasn't just a matter of knocking on doors. It was a full-on negotiation. The census was as much about persuasion as it was about counting, and you can bet those early officials had stories to tell. But let's not kid ourselves. This was hardly an efficient process. Mistakes were rampant. People were missed, and numbers were fudged. Some citizens tried to hide their wealth, while others exaggerated it to gain more influence. It was a system ripe for manipulation, and boy, did people take advantage. It's almost comforting to know that even in ancient times, human nature hadn't changed all that much. We've always been good at finding ways to game the system. So, while we might romanticize the grandeur of Rome now, it's worth remembering that the empire was built on a foundation of very human flaws. The census was a microcosm of all that was Rome, ambitious, flawed, and eternally fascinating. It was a tool of control and a symbol of the growing empire, but it was also a reminder that behind every great civilization are the messy, complex realities of daily life. In the end, the Roman census tells us more than just numbers. It tells us about power dynamics, economic struggles, and the perennial human quest for order in a chaotic world. It's a story of ambition and avarice, of ideals and imperfections, and it's just the beginning. As Rome grew, so did the challenges of counting its people, a tale that only gets more complicated as the centuries roll on. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Roman census is far from over, and there's plenty more bureaucracy where that came from. And so, as the Roman Republic strutted onto the stage of history, the census found itself evolving from a scrappy head count into a sophisticated, albeit flawed, mechanism of statecraft. Picture this. The Roman census was like the ultimate multi-tool, part tax collector, part military recruiter, with a dash of political intrigue thrown in for good measure. It was a bureaucrat's Swiss army knife, and boy, did they try to wield it effectively. But before we get carried away with visions of efficient governance, let's pump the brakes and take a closer look at how this all played out in reality. First off, let's talk numbers. By the late Republic, the census was supposed to tally every Roman citizen, from the wealthiest patrician lounging in his marble villa to the humblest plebeian eking out a living in the countryside. We're talking about a population that could swell to over 1 million souls by the end of the Republic. Imagine trying to keep track of that many people without computers or even abacuses. It was like trying to herd cats with a faulty lasso. The census officials, or censors, were like the original data analysts, only their spreadsheets were massive wax tablets, and their formulas relied more on guesstimates than hard data. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts. The census was conducted every 5 years, a period conveniently known as a lustrum, because if you're going to make a bureaucratic nightmare, you might as well give it a cool name. The censors would set up shop in Rome, summoning citizens to declare their assets, family members, and, of course, whether they owed any taxes or military service. Think of it as a mandatory medieval TED talk where you had to divulge your net worth and your son's draft status. But here's the kicker. The entire system relied heavily on trust and personal honor. Citizens were expected to self-report their wealth and household details truthfully. And just like that, you can see the cracks forming. It was like trusting a politician to keep their campaign promises, an optimistic endeavor at best. People quickly realized that underreporting wealth could save them a few coins, while overstating it could boost their social standing. The result? A tangled web of half-truths, outright lies, and a lot of creative accounting. The Roman census became the original playground for those who believed rules were more of a suggestion than a mandate. And let's not forget the military angle. The census determined not only how much tax you paid, but also your military obligations. Being wealthy meant you could afford better armor and weapons, so congratulations. You've just earned yourself a spot in the front lines of the Roman legions. It was a bit like winning the lottery, but instead of a cash prize, you got a one-way ticket to the battlefield. For those lower on the economic ladder, the census could mean conscription into the less glamorous roles. Think of it as being drafted into the Roman equivalent of KP duty. But enough about taxes and warfare. Let's talk politics. The census was a prime opportunity for Roman elites to flex their political muscles. Since wealth correlated with voting power, the more money you had, the louder your voice in the assembly. It was like a high-stakes game of Monopoly where the rich got richer and everyone else just tried to stay afloat. And in a society where power was everything, the census became a tool for political maneuvering, with the elite using it to cement their status and influence. Of course, with great power came great opportunities for corruption. Censors could be bribed to overlook certain discrepancies or to favor certain families. It was the ancient version of a backroom deal, with a hint of toga-clad skullduggery. And while we're on the subject of skullduggery, let's not ignore the occasional scandal. Just like a modern-day data breach, the results of certain censuses could be misplaced or misinterpreted, leading to a lot of finger-pointing and a few public shaming sessions in the forum. So, While the Roman census was meant to be a tool for order and control, it often devolved into a chaotic dance of human ambition and error. It was a system constantly teetering on the edge of collapse, yet somehow it endured, a testament to the resilience and stubbornness of the Roman state. As the Republic marched toward empire, the census continued to evolve, reflecting both the successes and failures of Rome itself. And as we'll see in the next chapters, the saga of the Roman census was far from over. So stay tuned, because the story of Rome's most ambitious bureaucratic endeavor is only just beginning. As the Roman Republic teetered on the precipice of empire, enter stage left Augustus, the man who would turn this bureaucratic boondoggle into a finely tuned instrument of power. Augustus, or Octavian, before he rebranded himself with a name fit for an emperor, saw the Roman census not just as a tool for counting and taxing, but as a cornerstone of control. If the early census was a rickety wooden cart, Augustus transformed it into a sleek chariot of imperial administration, complete with gilded wheels and a driver who knew exactly where he was going. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, recognized that a sprawling empire needed more than just a few scribes with wax tablets. We're talking about a realm that stretched from the sun-baked sands of Egypt to the misty hills of northern Britain. Counting heads across such a vast territory was akin to herding cats, only these cats were scattered across multiple continents and spoke different languages. And yet Augustus was undeterred. He saw the census as a way to weave the disparate threads of the empire into a tapestry of order and efficiency. His vision was nothing short of revolutionary, a census that wasn't just about numbers, but about mapping the very bones of the empire. But let's not get carried away with visions of Augustus as some kind of ancient Bill Gates. This was about control, pure, unadulterated control. The census, under Augustus's watchful eye, became a tool to reinforce his rule and keep the provinces in line. He understood that knowledge was power, and by systematically recording the wealth, property, and military obligations of his subjects, he could wield that power with precision. The census became the backbone of Roman administration, a skeleton of data upon which the muscles of government could flex and move. Now, if you're picturing a seamless operation, think again. The logistical nightmare of counting people across such vast territories was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. It required an army of officials, each tasked with navigating the treacherous waters of Roman bureaucracy. These were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung masochists, of the empire, armed with little more than scrolls and sandals, tasked with the Herculean feat of organizing chaos. The process was anything but straightforward. Each province had its own quirks and challenges, from the Gaelic tribes who'd rather fight than be counted, to the Egyptian farmers who saw the census as a harbinger of tax hikes. It was like organizing a global census today without the luxury of databases or the internet. Augustus's officials had to rely on local leaders to provide accurate information, a bit like asking your cat to guard a fish. You can imagine the creative reporting that ensued. And yet, Augustus's census was a marvel of its time. Every 5 years, the empire's officials would fan out like a well-oiled machine, or at least a machine that occasionally sputtered and died. They documented everything from livestock numbers to the value of land, creating a detailed snapshot of the empire's economic health. It was like taking the empire's pulse, only instead of a stethoscope, they used a quill and parchment. But here's the kicker. Augustus's census wasn't just about gathering data. It was about shaping society. By recording wealth and status, the census reinforced the social hierarchy, ensuring that everyone knew their place in the grand pecking order of Roman life. It was a delicate balancing act of carrots and sticks, with Augustus holding the scales. It wasn't all sunshine and olive branches, though. The census also had a darker side, one that Augustus was all too willing to exploit. It became a tool for auditing the empire, a way to root out corruption and inefficiency. In Augustus's Rome, the wrong numbers could mean more than just a slap on the wrist. They could mean exile, or worse. It was ancient auditing with a side of gallows humor, where every miscount had the potential to become a public spectacle. Drawing modern parallels, imagine a world where every census error was broadcast on the evening news, not exactly a comforting thought. In Augustus's time, the stakes were high, and the consequences of failure were severe. It was a system that demanded precision yet thrived in a world of ambiguity. And while it might be tempting to romanticize the empire's efficiency, the reality was far messier. It was a dance of power and politics, of ambition and avarice, where every number counted. So, if you ever find yourself cursing the modern DMV or IRS, spare a thought for those Roman officials, tasked with taming an empire with nothing more than ink and ambition. Augustus's Census was the original big data, a proto-Google of sorts, where the search engine was human and the results were penned in Latin. And as the empire continued to expand, so too did the challenges of keeping it all in check. Augustus's reforms laid the groundwork for a system that would endure for centuries, a testament to the power of bureaucracy and the relentless march of Roman ingenuity. But the story of the Roman census doesn't end here. Oh no, there's plenty more to explore as the empire marches forward, each step echoing with the sound of quills on parchment and the rustle of togas in the wind. Stay tuned, because the saga of Rome's most ambitious bureaucratic endeavor is far from over. So, as Augustus's census machine clattered along the cobblestones of the empire, let's pause to ask, what did the average Roman think about being counted like a sheep in a pen? Spoiler alert. They weren't exactly lining up to be part of the imperial head count. Picture this. A farmer in the remote corners of Gaul, squinting suspiciously at a Roman official who insists that knowing the exact number of his goats is crucial for the empire's well-being. It's safe to say that not everyone was thrilled to have their lives reduced to columns on a wax tablet. Roman citizens approached this bureaucratic exercise with a mixture of skepticism and cunning, much like the way we might approach a tax audit today. For many, the census was an invasive spotlight on their private affairs, a reminder that Big Brother, or maybe Big Caesar, was watching. It wasn't just about tallying people, it was about tallying wealth, and where wealth was involved, you bet there were plenty of creative dodges. Wealthier Romans might hide a villa or two under Aunt Flavia's name, while the less affluent might downplay their livestock count, hoping to shave off a few denarii from their tax bill. But let's take a closer look at the myth of Roman efficiency, shall we? We often imagine the Romans as a paragon of order, but the truth was more like a bureaucratic circus, complete with its share of clowns and jugglers. Sure, Augustus might have had grand designs for a streamlined empire, but the reality was more akin to a game of telephone played across a vast landscape. By the time the census takers' notes made it back to Rome, they'd been copied, recopied, and occasionally misinterpreted by officials who were likely more familiar with wine than with accurate data entry. And here's another fun twist. Romans weren't only resistant to the census because they were tax-averse. There was a social dynamic at play, too. In a rigidly hierarchical society, being counted meant being categorized, and not everyone was thrilled about where they landed on the social ladder. The census had a knack for reinforcing the status quo, which meant that if you were on the lower rungs, you stayed there. Imagine a world where your social standing was re-evaluated every 5 years, like a medieval LinkedIn update that never quite worked in your favor. Naturally, this didn't sit well with everyone, and resistance was part of the Roman census saga. While we don't have records of full-blown census riots, you can bet there were more than a few heated exchanges between officials and citizens who felt their privacy was being invaded. Some offered bribes to disappear from the rolls, while others simply forgot to mention a new addition to the family or a lucrative side hustle. In essence, they were the original tax evaders, dodging imperial oversight with a creativity that would make modern accountants proud. And let's not forget the political angle. For the ambitious Roman elites, the census was an opportunity to flex their muscles and assert influence. But for your average citizen, it was a reminder of their place in a political machine that rarely had their best interests at heart. The census was a stark reflection of power dynamics, where the rich leveraged their assets for political clout, while the rest grappled with the mundane realities of taxation and conscription. Now, you might think we've evolved from those days of counting heads and taxing goats. Have we really? Fast forward a couple of millennia, and here we are, still grumbling about taxes and government forms. Sure, we've swapped wax tablets for digital spreadsheets, but the human element, the skepticism, the avoidance, the occasional outright rebellion, is as alive as ever. Just like our Roman counterparts, We eye government oversight with a mix of resignation and resentment, always searching for a loophole or a way to make the system work in our favor. The parallels are uncanny, aren't they? It's a testament to the idea that while our tools may evolve, human nature remains stubbornly consistent. Whether it's a Roman senator or a modern-day taxpayer, the dance between individuals and authority is a timeless waltz with familiar beats. So the next time you find yourself cursing the complexities of a tax return, spare a thought for those ancient Romans who faced the same bureaucratic headaches. Sans the internet, of course. But let's not get too cozy with the idea that the Roman census was a complete mess. For all its flaws, it was a remarkable achievement in statecraft, a testament to the ambition and audacity of a civilization determined to impose order in an inherently chaotic world. It laid the groundwork for systems of governance that would endure long after the empire's decline, shaping the way societies approach the complex task of managing people and resources. And as we delve deeper into the human side of the Roman census, remember that its legacy is more than just a relic of the past. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles with authority and governance, a reminder that the quest for power and control has always been a double-edged sword. So stay with us as we continue to unravel the intricate web of the Roman census, a story rich with human drama, political intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of order amid the chaos. The tale of Rome's most ambitious bureaucratic endeavor is far from over, and there's plenty more to discover in the chapters ahead. As we continue to unravel the intricate web of the Roman census, it's time to step back and consider its broader impact on history. Because, believe it or not, the Romans didn't just leave us with a penchant for aqueducts and a love of gladiatorial combat. They also gifted us a bureaucratic blueprint that echoes through the ages, right up to today's census forms that we love to hate. So, let's dive into the Roman legacy and how their administrative practices laid the groundwork for modern census taking. First, a little myth-busting. If you think the Romans had a monopoly on counting people, you're wrong. The idea of a census predates them, with examples from ancient Egypt and China. But the Romans, those overachievers of antiquity, took the concept and turned it into an empire-wide operation, complete with all the drama and dysfunction you'd expect from a civilization that loved its politics as much as its poetry. The Roman census was a beast that evolved over time. By the time Augustus got his hands on it, it had transformed from a local head count into a sophisticated system of imperial administration. This was no small feat. Imagine trying to count every citizen across a sprawling empire without Google Maps or a reliable postal service. It was an exercise in logistics that would make even the most seasoned modern-day project manager break out in hives. And while Augustus might have been the star of the show, let's not forget the unsung heroes, the censors. These officials were the original data analysts, and while they didn't have access to Excel, they did have the Roman knack for turning chaos into order. Armed with scrolls, quills, and a healthy dose of skepticism, they traveled the empire, tallying people, livestock, and wealth. It was like an ancient version of the U.S. Census Bureau, only with more togas and fewer clipboards. But enough about logistics, let's talk influence. The Roman census wasn't just about numbers, it was about control. It was a way for the empire to flex its muscles and remind its citizens who was in charge. And while the idea of a census might sound dry, it was a powerful tool for shaping society. By recording wealth, property, and military obligations, the census reinforced social hierarchies and ensured that everyone knew their place in the Roman pecking order. And here's where things get really interesting. The Roman approach to census taking didn't just fade away with the fall of the empire. Instead, it left a legacy that influenced the development of modern administrative practices. Fast forward to the present day, and you'll find echoes of the Roman system in the way governments around the world collect data and manage populations. From the US decennial census to the UK's Office for National Statistics, the Roman model of data-driven governance is alive and well. But before you start romanticizing the efficiency of the Roman system, let's remember the absurdity of bureaucracy. Even in ancient times, the quest for order was a double-edged sword. The Roman census was notorious for its inaccuracies, and the results were often skewed by human error, corruption, and a healthy dose of creative accounting. It was a system that demanded precision, yet thrived in a world of ambiguity, a recipe for chaos if ever there was one. And yet, for all its flaws, the Roman census was a remarkable achievement. It was a testament to the empire's ambition and ingenuity, a reminder that even in a world without modern technology, humans have always been driven to quantify and control. It's a legacy that speaks to the enduring human desire for order, even in the face of chaos. A desire that's as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. So, what can we learn from the Roman census? For starters, it's a lesson in the power of data, a reminder that information is a potent tool for shaping societies. It's also a cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition, a reminder that even the most sophisticated systems are susceptible to the whims of human nature. And perhaps most importantly, it's a reflection of the timeless struggle between individuals and authority, a dance that's been playing out since the dawn of civilization. In the end, the Roman census is more than just a historical footnote. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles with governance and control. It's a story that resonates across the ages, a testament to the complexity of human societies and the enduring quest for order amid chaos. So, the next time you find yourself filling out a census form or grumbling about taxes, spare a thought for those ancient Romans and their ambitious endeavor to count and control an empire. As we wrap up this exploration of the Roman census, let's leave with a final nod to the absurdity of bureaucracy. Because while the Romans might have been masters of administration, they were also human, and their systems were as flawed and fascinating as the people who created them. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex tapestry of human stories, each one contributing to the rich and varied saga of our shared past. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of togas and tablets, remember this. The Roman census was more than just a head count. It was a bold experiment in governance, a testament to the power of data, and a reflection of the timeless human quest for control. And while the specifics may have changed, the legacy of the Roman census endures, a reminder that even in the face of bureaucracy, there's always a story worth telling. In the beginning, there was rock, lots of it, and the Mycenaeans, those proto-Greek builders extraordinaire, saw it and thought, let's make this our claim to fame. Around 1600 BCE, these folks showed up on the Greek mainland and decided that constructing massive stone fortresses was the way to announce their arrival. Forget social media flexing. These guys were the OG influencers, flaunting their architectural prowess like it was nobody's business. The Mycenaeans were masterful at turning stone into status, but they weren't content with just any old rocks. No, they were all about the Cyclopean masonry, a style so grand and intimidating that later Greeks figured only the Cyclopes, those mythical one-eyed giants, could have possibly lugged those boulders into place. These monumental structures, like the famous Lion Gate at Mycenae, architectural equivalent of a power suit, telling the world they meant business and weren't afraid to show it. But let's rewind a bit. Before they were building fortresses that looked like they could withstand the wrath of the gods, the Mycenaeans were busy borrowing a leaf, or maybe a whole olive grove, from their neighbors, the Minoans. Now, the Minoans, who were chilling over on Crete, were the original trendsetters of the Aegean. They had a thing for palatial complexes, vibrant frescoes, and a bustling trade network that made the Mycenaeans look like they were still figuring out how to play the game. So what did the Mycenaeans do? They played the ultimate game of cultural copycat. They swiped Minoan administrative practices, art styles, and even their linear script, which the Mycenaeans tweaked into Linear B. It was the ancient version of a software update. Take what works, add a few new features, and voila, you have a system that's ready to manage your growing empire. And manage they did. The Mycenaean civilization became a powerhouse, their influence stretching across the Aegean and beyond, thanks in no small part to their penchant for trade. Their trade networks were like the ancient Silk Road of the Mediterranean, but with fewer camels and more ships. Mycenaean traders were the intrepid UPS drivers of the ancient world, delivering exotic goods from as far afield as Egypt and the Near East. They bartered for copper, tin, and luxury items, bringing back enough bling to make a pharaoh blush. Gold death masks, like the famed Mask of Agamemnon, were all the rage, proving that the Mycenaeans had a flair for funerary fashion that was to die for, literally. Yet, for all their golden extravagance and fortress-building bravado, The Mycenaeans had a softer side too. Enter their pottery. Not just any pottery, but some seriously durable stuff. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill ceramic. Their pottery was built to last, like those indestructible Nokia phones of yore. You know, the ones you could drop from a 5-story building and still use to call your mom. But why does any of this matter, you ask? Well, these cultural flourishes and infrastructural feats were the first glimmers of what would eventually become Greek culture. The Mycenaeans laid down the groundwork for a civilization that would go on to ponder democracy, philosophy, and the pros and cons of wearing togas as everyday attire. They were the foundation, quite literally, of what would become one of the most influential cultures in Western history. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and gold leaf. The Mycenaeans were also known for their warrior culture. They were like the Spartans before it was cool, obsessed with honor, valor, and occasionally bashing their neighbors' heads in to prove a point. Their warriors were depicted in art as larger-than-life figures, the ancient equivalent of action movie stars, complete with rippling muscles and a penchant for heroics. In the end, the Mycenaeans were a complex lot, a blend of borrowed brilliance and original audacity. They were the kind of civilization that could sip fine Minoan wine one moment and charge into battle the next, all while wearing the most fashionable bronze armor of the age. So, the next time you hear about the glories of Greece, remember the Mycenaeans, the stone-loving, gold-hoarding forebears who set the stage for history's greatest dramas. Yet, while the Mycenaeans were busy designing their dazzling fortresses and living it up like ancient rock stars, they were also knee-deep in the messy business of politics. You see, their political landscape was less Game of Thrones, and more like an ancient version of a frantic city council meeting. At the heart of it all was the Wanax, basically the Mycenaean king, though king might be a bit too grand considering his daily grind. This guy was the ultimate multitasker, wearing hats as varied as military commander, chief bureaucrat, and high priest. Picture a CEO who also moonlights as a mayor and occasionally leads the community choir. That's the Wanax for you. Keeping a tight grip on power was no small feat when your neighbors were as unpredictable as the Greek weather. The Mycenaeans were surrounded by rival factions, each one ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. This wasn't just a matter of flexing military might. It required a keen sense of diplomacy and a watchful eye on those pesky neighbors who were as likely to be allies as they were enemies. Wanax had to be as cunning as a fox, and as bold as a lion, juggling alliances like a circus performer with too many balls in the air. And while the Wanax handled the big picture, the nitty-gritty of running a kingdom came down to bureaucracy. Cue the Linear B tablets, the ancient Greek equivalent of post-it notes. These were the administrative backbone of Mycenaean society, a collection of clay tablets that recorded everything from tax accounts to mundane shopping lists. Forget grand declarations or epic poetry. These tablets were more like the contents of a cluttered office desk. We're talking lists of grain rations, inventories of livestock, and orders for the latest shipment of olive oil. Not exactly the stuff of legend, but crucial for keeping the wheels of the kingdom turning. Linear B was the Mycenaeans' adapted version of the Minoan linear, a script, a tweak-and-go approach that suited their practical needs. It wasn't about creating high art or preserving epic sagas. It was about keeping track of who owed what and how much barley was needed to feed the troops. The Mycenaeans were nothing if not efficient, and these tablets are a testament to their bureaucratic brilliance. They reveal a society deeply concerned with numbers and logistics, more akin to a spreadsheet than a storybook. But let's not get too romantic about the power of these tablets. They didn't exactly reveal the secrets of the universe. Instead, they offered glimpses into the daily grind of Mycenaean life, like finding an ancient grocery list on the back of a receipt. It's here that we see a civilization deeply embedded in trade and agriculture, with economic tentacles stretching across the Mediterranean. The tablets detail everything from shipments of sheep wool to the management of vast tracts of land, painting a picture of a society that was as much about commerce as it was about conquest. So, while the Wanax might have been strutting around in his ceremonial robes, barking orders and plotting the next move in his geopolitical chess game, it was the scribes and administrators who kept the kingdom humming. They were the unsung heroes, the faceless bureaucrats who ensured that the granaries were full and the workers got their rations. We'll never know their names, but their clay tablets speak volumes, offering us a peek into the machinations of Mycenaean governance. Of course, all this bureaucratic prowess didn't mean the Mycenaeans were immune to the odd hiccup. The same tablets that detail their meticulous record-keeping also hint at a society that lived on a knife's edge. Mismanagement, drought, or a failed harvest could spell disaster, and when the stakes are that high, tensions tend to rise faster than a baking loaf of barley bread. It was a constant balancing act, a delicate dance between prosperity and peril. So, as we peer into the world of the Mycenaeans, we see a civilization that was as much about paperwork as it was about palaces. Their political landscape might not have been the stuff of epic sagas, but it was rich with the intrigue and complexity of real-world governance. The Wanax and his advisors were like the original policymakers, navigating the tumultuous waters of ancient politics with a mix of cunning, pragmatism, and more than a sprinkle of luck. And while the Mycenaeans might not be the first name on everyone's lips when it comes to ancient Greece, their contributions were foundational to what came next. They laid the groundwork, both literally and figuratively, for the great Greek civilizations that followed. Their legacy is woven into the very fabric of Greek history, testament to the power of stone, scribes, and a little bit of swagger. The Mycenaeans, with their feet firmly planted in both grandeur and gritty reality, were a civilization that had more layers than a baklava. Just when you think you've got them pinned as fortress-building, gold-hoarding warriors, they surprise you with an economy that was as intricate as it was inventive. Imagine an ancient society that looked at the chaos of a modern board game and thought, let's one-up that with olives, wine, taxes, and a touch of strategic trade. Welcome to the Mycenaean economy, a complex dance of exports, imports, and enough fiscal maneuvering to make even the shrewdest modern economist nod in appreciation. Now, while the Mycenaeans were busy making sure their fortresses were Insta-worthy, if Instagram had been a thing, of course, they were also masterminding an economic network that was nothing short of impressive. This wasn't some rudimentary barter system. This was a full-blown Mediterranean marketplace, with Mycenaeans acting as both the Amazon and Alibaba of their time. They exported luxury goods like finely crafted pottery, which were not just any old vases, but clay masterpieces that could grace any ancient Martha Stewart living room. These were shipped far and wide, reaching as far as the Levant and Egypt, regions that were practically the New York and Paris of the Bronze Age world. But what were they getting in return for these ceramic treasures and other artisanal goods? Well, the Mycenaeans had an appetite for raw materials that their rocky homeland couldn't quite satisfy. They imported copper from Cyprus, tin from as far off as Afghanistan. Yes, you heard that right, Afghanistan, and gold from Nubia, all essential for their bronze-making obsession. This wasn't just trade. This was an intricate supply chain that would have made any logistics manager proud. They were gathering the elements needed to forge weapons, tools, and trinkets that would bolster their economy and their military might. And let's not forget the wine and olive oil, the ancient equivalents of today's must-have commodities. These weren't just dietary staples. They were liquid gold that lubricated the gears of trade and diplomacy. Speaking of olive oil, the Mycenaeans treated it with the reverence of a modern hipster's avocado toast. They used it not just for cooking, but also in religious ceremonies, as a base for perfumes, and even as currency in some instances. You could say olive oil was the Mycenaean Bitcoin, a versatile asset that could be traded, invested, and flaunted. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely with all this trade and economic genius, the Mycenaeans were living in opulence, right? Well, not so fast. While the Mycenaean elite were indeed rolling in luxury, enjoying the spoils of their extensive trade networks, the average Mycenaean Joe was more likely to be knee-deep in the day-to-day drudgery of agricultural life. You see, beneath the glossy veneer of gold and pottery was a society heavily reliant on its agrarian roots. The economy might have had the polish of a luxury brand, but it was built on the backs of farmers who spent their days coaxing crops from the often unyielding Greek soil. The reality was less lifestyles of the rich and famous, and more survivor, ancient Greece edition. And let's not forget about taxes, because of course, taxes are the one constant through history, as inevitable as death, and well, more taxes. The Mycenaean state had an elaborate system for collecting dues, using those trusty linear B tablets to keep track of who owed what. In fact, these tax records, are some of the most revealing artifacts we have about Mycenaean society. They show us a picture of a civilization that, while trading in luxury goods, was also deeply concerned with maintaining a steady flow of resources to keep the state machinery running smoothly. Here's the kicker. The Mycenaean economy was surprisingly modern, with a level of complexity that makes you wonder if they had a secret MBA program tucked away in one of those fortresses. They balanced a diverse portfolio of goods, managed international trade relations, and somehow avoided the kind of catastrophic fiscal collapse that could have brought their civilization to its knees. But this wasn't some economic utopia. The Mycenaeans, like the rest of us, were not immune to financial woes. Droughts, failed harvests, and the occasional bout of mismanagement could send shockwaves through their economy, much like a modern stock market crash. Yet they adapted, innovated, and made the best out of their situation, showing a resilience that was as much a part of their legacy as their stone citadels. So, next time you hear tales of Mycenaean opulence, remember that it wasn't all gold masks and palace banquets. The real story is one of a society balancing on the edge of prosperity and hardship, where the gleam of luxury goods was often underwritten by the sweat of hard labor and the constant threat of economic peril. They were the ancient world's version of a startup that made it big, a testament to the enduring human spirit of innovation, ambition, and just a little bit of luck. The Mycenaeans were more than just warriors and builders. They were economic maestros playing a high-stakes game of trade and survival, proving that even in the ancient world, it was all about who you knew and what you could get for a good deal of olive oil and pottery. As the Mycenaeans navigated their economic adventures, they also dabbled in a little something we like to call cultural innovation. These folks were not just about the bling and the brawn. They were busy laying the groundwork for what would become the tapestry of Greek mythology and artistic expression. Think of them as the ancient world's mixologists, shaking up a cocktail of stories and styles that would leave a lasting buzz long after their civilization had faded. Let's start with their architectural piece de resistance, the Lion Gate at Mycenae. It's not just a gate, it's a statement piece. Built around 1250 BCE, this grand entrance is flanked by 2 stone lions, though technically the heads are missing, so they could be anything from lions to really buff cats. The gate isn't just about aesthetics. It's a symbol of power, a stone-cold reminder to visitors that they were entering a place of significance. It's like the ancient version of a red carpet entrance, minus the paparazzi and awkward interviews. But what's truly fascinating is how this architectural marvel connects to the myths that would later captivate the Greek imagination. The Mycenaeans, you see, were storytellers par excellence. Their tales of gods, heroes, and epic battles were the building blocks of the myths we know today. They didn't just tell stories, they lived them, embedding their beliefs and values into every stone and sculpture. Consider the legend of the Trojan War. We all know the story. Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and the epic siege of Troy. While Homer gets the credit for immortalizing it in the Iliad, the roots of this saga can be traced back to the Mycenaeans. They were already spinning tales of heroic deeds and divine interventions long before Homer put quill to papyrus. The Mycenaeans might not have had Hollywood, but they sure knew how to script a blockbuster. Now, let's talk about the myths themselves. These weren't just fanciful tales to entertain the masses. They were the Mycenaeans' way of making sense of the world. Take the story of Perseus, the legendary slayer of Medusa. This tale isn't just about monster hunting. It's a reflection of a society grappling with the unknown, using myth to impose order on chaos. The Mycenaeans were like ancient life coaches, using stories to teach lessons about bravery, honor, and the occasional need to decapitate a snake-haired Gorgon. Of course, not all myths were created equal. Some were downright ludicrous, and that's part of their charm. Take the legend of King Minos' labyrinth, where the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, was said to lurk. This tale, with its mix of horror and heroism, was likely inspired by the Mycenaeans' interactions with the Minoans, their Cretan neighbors who were known for their elaborate palaces and possibly questionable genetic experiments. Just kidding, probably. The Mycenaeans loved a good story, but they also knew how to weave it into their art. Their pottery, for instance, was more than just a way to hold wine. It was a canvas for storytelling, featuring scenes of battles, rituals, and daily life. These visual narratives were the ancient equivalent of comic books, capturing the drama and humor of Mycenaean society in a few deft strokes of the brush. And let's not forget their contribution to the Greek language. The Mycenaeans' use of Linear B script was a linguistic leap forward, one that would eventually evolve into the Greek alphabet. It's like they were the linguistic influencers, hashtagging their way through history with symbols that would outlast their civilization and become the foundation for Western literature. Now, while the Mycenaeans were busy shaping the mythological landscape, they were also wrestling with some decidedly unglamorous realities. For starters, their society wasn't exactly the bastion of equality. Power was concentrated in the hands of the Wanax and his elite circle, leaving the average Mycenaean to toil in relative obscurity. The myths of heroic kings and divine favor were, in many ways, a reflection of this hierarchical structure, a way to justify the power dynamics of the time. And yet, despite these inequalities, the Mycenaeans' cultural achievements were nothing short of remarkable. They were the OG content creators, blending fact and fiction to craft a legacy that would echo through the ages. Their myths, art, and architecture were more than just cultural artifacts. They were the original influencers, setting trends and shaping narratives that would endure long after their civilization had crumbled. So, next time you hear tales of Greek mythology, remember that the Mycenaeans were the ones who first spun these yarns, using stories to make sense of a world that was as unpredictable as it was awe-inspiring. They were the ancient world's storytellers, architects, and myth-makers, leaving behind a legacy that was as enduring as the stone lions guarding their gates. And while their civilization may have eventually faded, their tales of gods and heroes continue to captivate our imaginations, reminding us that even in the distant past, the power of a good story was the ultimate influencer. And just as the Mycenaeans were setting the stage for epic poetry and mythical beasts, real life was brewing a storm of its own, more of a slow, rolling fog than a lightning strike. Around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization started to unravel like a poorly knit sweater. The burning question is, what happened? Why did this seemingly robust culture, with its stone citadels and sprawling trade networks, start to crumble like a stale cookie? First theory on the docket: invasions. Some scholars suggest that the mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of naval raiders with a penchant for causing havoc, may have played a significant role. These marauding bands are said to have swept across the eastern Mediterranean, leaving a trail of destruction that would put a modern-day rock band to shame. But hold your horses, or triremes, in this case, because the evidence for a full-scale invasion of the Mycenaean heartland is as elusive as a good Wi-Fi signal in a stone fortress. While there are signs of conflict in some coastal settlements, the inland palaces seem to have suffered more from internal decay than external blows. Speaking of internal issues, let's talk about political instability. Picture a game of musical chairs where the music stops, and suddenly everyone's lost their seat, and possibly their head. The Wanax, or king, was supposed to be the glue holding everything together, but around this time, it seems the glue was more like that cheap stuff that doesn't stick. Power struggles and a breakdown in central authority likely played a part, as ruling dynasties scrambled for control like kids fighting over the last cookie in the jar. Without strong leadership, the bureaucratic machine that kept the Mycenaean world ticking began to falter. And then there's the ever-reliable scapegoat: natural disasters. Earthquakes, droughts, and famines could have delivered the 1-2 punch to an already wobbling society. The Greek mainland is no stranger to tectonic tantrums, and a few well-placed quakes could have toppled those mighty fortress walls more efficiently than any battering ram. Add to that the potential for prolonged droughts. Scientific studies suggest significant climate shifts around this time, and you have a recipe for agricultural disaster. When your economy is as dependent on farming as the Mycenaeans was, a few bad harvests could mean game over. But let's not forget the human element: bad decisions, or rather, a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony snicket nod in recognition. Overextension of resources, over-reliance on trade networks that might have collapsed, and perhaps even a touch of complacency. When you're sitting atop a pile of gold, it's easy to start believing your own hype. The Mycenaeans might have been victims of their success, unable to adapt quickly enough to changing circumstances. So, was it the Sea Peoples, shaky leadership, Mother Nature throwing a tantrum, or just bad luck? The truth is likely a cocktail of these factors, shaken, not stirred, into a perfect storm. The decline was less a catastrophic fall and more a slow fade into obscurity, like a once famous actor quietly slipping into retirement. Now, what about the legacy, the enduring mark of the Mycenaeans? Well, they left behind more than just ruins and a few broken parts. Their influence seeped into the soil of Greek culture, nurturing the seeds of what would become classical Greece. The myths they spun, the scripts they wrote, trade routes they established, all these threads wove into the rich tapestry of Greek history. The Mycenaeans were like the opening act for a concert, setting the stage for the main performance of Athens and Sparta. But let's face it, sometimes the opening act steals the show. And let's not forget their pottery. Mycenaean ceramics are the gift that keeps on giving, unearthed by archaeologists like ancient Easter eggs. These pieces tell us of trade routes, economic conditions, and even cultural exchanges, acting as a time capsule for a world long vanished. They remind us that the Mycenaeans were not just about war and wealth. They were creators and innovators, artisans and architects of a civilization that still echoes in the halls of history. The Mycenaean decline is a reminder that no matter how grand a civilization may seem, it's always standing on the precipice of change. It's a humbling lesson in the impermanence of power, the fragility of human achievement, and the relentless march of time. They were the giants on whose shoulders the Greeks would later stand, proving that even in their decline, they were laying down the stepping stones to greatness. So, the next time you hear about the glories of ancient Greece, remember the Mycenaeans, the unsung architects of antiquity, whose legacy, though less shiny than their golden death masks, is as enduring as the myths they inspired. They remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the dreams, failures, and triumphs of those who came before us. And as we wrap up our journey through the Mycenaean world, let's take a moment to appreciate the echoes of their civilization that still resonate today, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and resilience. The Etruscans were the kind of neighbors who throw parties loud enough to make you forget your own name, let alone your grievances. Nestled in the rolling hills of what we now call Tuscany, Lazio, and Umbria, these ancient Italians had a reputation for living large and leaving a mark, literally. Their cities, perched atop volcanic plateaus, acted like beacons of civilization in a world that was still figuring out what civilization even meant. Now, about these parties, the Etruscans didn't just party, they partied like it was 399 BCE every day of the week. Their banquets were legendary, and not just because of the food. Sure, they had a thing for roasted meats, olives, and wine that would knock your sandals off, but it was the spectacle that really set them apart. Picture this, a room filled with the clinking of fine pottery, the aroma of rich dishes, and the sounds of music and laughter, an ancient Olive Garden commercial, but with more class and fewer breadsticks. The Etruscans were also quite the sartorial trendsetters. They gave the toga to the Romans, and let's be real, every empire needs a signature look. The toga was more than just a fashion statement. It was a social signal, a way to say, I'm part of the club, without uttering a single word. It wasn't just the toga, though. They had an eye for luxury that would make a modern influencer blush. Their love for fine pottery wasn't just about utility, it was about status. Owning an Etruscan vase was the ancient equivalent of having the latest iPhone, status and envy, all in one sleek package. The Romans, perhaps lured by the clink of pottery and the allure of a toga, started to take notice. Rome, in its early days, was like an eager intern, always watching and learning from the more experienced Etruscans. And why not? The Etruscans had already established a thriving civilization by the 8th century BCE, long before Rome even considered getting its act together. They were the cool older sibling, and Rome was the kid brother taking notes on how to be awesome. But it wasn't all banquets and fashion shows. The Etruscans were master builders, too. They had a knack for urban planning that would make any modern architect jealous. Their cities were fortified masterpieces, blending seamlessly into the landscape while providing security and style. And speaking of style, their artwork was a vibrant tapestry of influence, borrowing from the Greeks and Egyptians, but always adding their own flair. When we think of the Etruscans and their influence on Rome, it's tempting to focus on the glamorous bits, the parties, the pottery, the fashion. But the truth is, their impact was far more profound. They were the bridge between the Greeks and the Romans, the unsung heroes who took the best of both worlds and created something uniquely their own. Their social norms, their love of luxury, and their penchant for spectacle began to seep into Roman society like a slow but potent wine. So, while the Romans were busy laying the groundwork for what would become one of the greatest empires in history, it was the Etruscans who were quietly setting the stage. They were the original tastemakers, the influencers of their day, shaping the culture and society that Rome would eventually inherit and claim as its own. And as Rome grew, the echoes of Etruscan laughter and the clinking of their pottery could still be heard, a reminder of the vibrant civilization that once ruled the hills of central Italy. And what a stage it was! Rome, before it donned the imperial purple, was more of a muddy village than a city. Picture a place where the Tiber River seemed more interested in flooding than in flowing, and the ground was one big, soggy mess. If Rome was going to be anything more than a glorified swamp, it needed some serious work. Enter the Etruscans, with their engineering wizardry that turned Rome from a soggy blot on the map into a city with a future. Let's kick off with arches and drainage systems, those unsung heroes of architectural brilliance. The Etruscans didn't just build structures, they crafted solutions. They handed Rome the arch, a simple curve with the power to hold up everything from aqueducts to bridges. The Etruscan arch was like the skinny jeans of ancient construction. It looked good and worked even better. Roman architects took this Etruscan innovation and ran with it, eventually creating the colossal Colosseum and the awe-inspiring aqueducts. Now, let's talk drainage. Before the Etruscans, Rome's streets were less boulevard and more bog. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's ancient drainage system, was a game-changer. Initially a massive ditch, the Etruscans transformed it into a structured sewer system that still exists today. This wasn't just about keeping the streets dry, it was about survival. Without efficient drainage, Rome wouldn't have grown beyond a collection of huts. The Cloaca Maxima was the first step toward Rome becoming the bustling metropolis it was destined to be. But hold your horses. Before Rome could claim these innovations as its own, we've got to talk about the men who made it happen. The early kings of Rome, often shrouded in myth, were more likely Etruscan imports than homegrown heroes. Forget the romanticized founding myths of Romulus and Remus, raised by wolves and building empires by hand. It's more probable that Rome's first kings were savvy Etruscan leaders who knew a thing or two about turning mud into marble. Consider Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king of Rome, and surprise, surprise, an Etruscan. His reign wasn't just about wearing a crown, it was about laying down infrastructure. Tarquinius Priscus is credited with initiating the Circus Maximus, a massive venue for public spectacles. Imagine living in a time where you could watch chariot races and gladiatorial battles, thanks to an Etruscan king who knew how to win over the crowds. And then there was Servius Tullius, another king with Etruscan roots. He fortified the city with the Servian Wall, a defensive barrier that gave Rome a sense of security and permanence. This wasn't just about keeping enemies out, it was about establishing Rome as a force to be reckoned with. These kings, with their Etruscan know-how, laid the foundation, literally and figuratively, for what Rome would become. The myths of Rome's founding have their charm, sure, but the reality is far more intriguing. The Etruscans didn't just influence Rome, they were instrumental in its transformation from a marshy settlement to a city of stone and spectacle. The romantic tale of twin brothers suckled by a she-wolf might make for a compelling story, but the true architects of Rome's early days were the Etruscan kings and their clever use of arches and drains. These innovations might not seem glamorous, but they were the bedrock of Rome's future glory. Without the Etruscan contributions to architecture and engineering, Rome might have stayed a small, muddy town, overshadowed by its more sophisticated neighbors. Instead, Rome learned from the best, taking Etruscan ingenuity and crafting an empire that would leave its mark on the world. So, the next time you picture ancient Rome, with its grand arenas and bustling streets, remember the Etruscans. They were the unsung heroes, the behind-the-scenes masterminds who laid the groundwork for a city that would eventually become the heart of a vast empire. The arches and drainage systems they introduced were more than just practical solutions. They were a promise of what was to come, a city that would rise from the mud to stand tall, thanks to the legacy of its Etruscan mentors. Now, we've journeyed from togas and drainage systems to the intricate dance of Roman religious and political evolution, all with the Etruscans as the unsung choreographers. While Rome was busy transforming from a backwater village into a burgeoning power, it was also absorbing the spiritual and governmental wisdom of its Etruscan neighbors. Because who doesn't like a good cultural remix? Let's dive into the divine soap opera that is Roman religion. Before Jupiter was throwing thunderbolts from the heavens, the Romans were taking notes from the Etruscan playbook. The Etruscans, with their penchant for borrowing gods as if they were borrowing sugar, had a pantheon that was a veritable who's who of divine beings. They even introduced the Romans to the concept of a triad of gods, Tinia, Uni, and Minerva. Sound familiar? That's because these deities would later be rebranded as the Roman gods Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. It's like the ultimate cosmic reality show where gods get a makeover and a new set of followers. But wait, there's more. The Etruscans didn't just influence the Roman gods. They also introduced a whole suite of religious rituals that became staples of Roman spirituality. One of the most intriguing was augury, the art of interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight patterns of birds. Imagine being able to predict the future just by looking up and seeing a flock of pigeons doing their thing. It's like reading tea leaves, but with wings. This avian divination became a cornerstone of Roman decision-making, proving once again that sometimes the answers really are for the birds. Now, as much fun as it is to think of ancient priests squinting skyward for divine guidance, the Etruscan influence wasn't just winged and whimsical. It had a serious side, too, especially when it came to governance. Early Rome was more of a political patchwork than a cohesive state. Enter the Etruscan model of city-states, a tried-and-true method where each city operated as an independent power player, complete with its own political structure and a healthy dose of competition. The Romans, ever the astute observers, saw the benefits of this system and began to shape their own governance in a similar fashion. The Etruscan city-state model also trickled down into Rome's nascent political institutions. When you think of Roman governance, you probably envision togas, scrolls, and a lot of senatorial hand-wringing. But before the Senate became the formidable institution we know today, it was heavily influenced by the Etruscan Assembly of Elders. This group of wise, albeit aging, men was essential in managing the city-state's affairs, and the Romans were keen to emulate this system. In fact, the very concept of the Senate and the people of Rome, or SBQR for the Latin lovers out there, has its roots in Etruscan governance. It wasn't just a catchy acronym. It was a political framework that allowed Rome to blossom from a loose collection of tribes into a republic. While the romanticized image of the Roman Senate conjures thoughts of noble debates and grand speeches, the reality was often a bit more mundane. Much like any political body, it involved a fair share of squabbling, deal-making, and the occasional scandal. And yet, it was a revolutionary step towards a more structured form of government, one that borrowed heavily from Etruscan models, but was distinctly Roman in its ambition. As we untangle the threads of history, it becomes clear that the Etruscans were the hidden architects behind much of what we associate with early Rome. From the divine to the political, their influence was profound and pervasive. The Romans, in their quest for greatness, were like sponges soaking up the best practices from those around them, particularly the Etruscans. And while the Romans would eventually outshine their mentors, the foundation laid by the Etruscans was crucial in shaping the identity of what would become one of history's most iconic empires. So, as we wander through the layers of Roman history, it's worth remembering the Etruscans, who were much more than just toga designers and party planners. They were the cultural and political trailblazers who set the stage for Rome's rise, influencing everything from the gods they worshipped to the way they governed themselves. And while they may not have gotten the credit they deserved in the history books, their legacy is woven into the very fabric of Roman civilization. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of Rome's evolution. There's more to explore, from military might to the intricate social norms that defined Roman life. But for now, let's tip our hats, or rather, our laurel wreaths to the Etruscans, the original influencers of ancient Italy. As we tip our laurel wreaths to the Etruscans, the original influencers of ancient Italy, it's time to dig into the cultural exchanges that went beyond the clang of swords and shields. Let's start with something that often gets overlooked in the shadow of grand amphitheaters and statues. Language. The Etruscan language, a bit of a linguistic unicorn, is like that mysterious relative nobody really knows at family reunions. It's the kind of language that makes linguists both excited and frustrated. Excited because it's unique, frustrated because it's as decipherable as a cryptic crossword without clues. Etruscan linguistic influence on Latin is like finding a hidden track on an album. It's subtle, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. While Latin eventually emerged as the dominant language, the Etruscans were there first, scribbling away in an alphabet that would act as the blueprint for the Latin script. Without this Etruscan contribution, the elegant curves and lines of Latin letters might have looked very different or not existed at all. The Etruscan alphabet, borrowed from the Greeks and tweaked for local flair, was like a startup that got acquired by the Latin language, which then went on to become a global conglomerate. And let's not forget about the art. Oh, the art. If Rome was an Instagram influencer, the Etruscans were the creative directors. Etruscan artistic styles were the seeds that sprouted into the towering oak of Roman aesthetics. Take their sculptures, for instance. Etruscan sculptures were lively, almost theatrical, capturing everything from the divine to the domestic with a flair that was as expressive as it was detailed. These weren't just statues. They were stories carved in stone, tales of gods, heroes, and everyday life. When the Romans decided they wanted in on the art scene, they looked to these vibrant expressions for inspiration. Etruscan frescoes, those wall-sized paintings that were the ancient equivalent of a Netflix binge, also left an indelible mark on Roman taste. Vivid colors, dynamic scenes, and a knack for capturing the human experience made these works pop in a way that would influence Roman artists for centuries. The Romans, never shy to borrow a good idea, took these techniques and ran with them, eventually transforming their villas and public buildings into canvases of political propaganda and personal expression. It was art as a social commentary, a concept the Etruscans had mastered long before Rome's rise. Contrary to the myth of Rome, as a solitary genius of cultural innovation, it was more of a magpie, collecting shiny bits of culture from its neighbors, especially the Etruscans. The Etruscans laid the groundwork with their artistic flair and linguistic innovation, and Rome, ever the opportunist, capitalized on it. This borrowing wasn't just a case of imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. It was a strategic absorption of cultural capital that would propel Rome to new heights. The Romans were like the tech companies of today, standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before them. However, let's not get too romantic here. For all the beauty and creativity, there was a harsh reality to these cultural exchanges. Economic necessity often drove these interactions. The Etruscans, with their rich mineral resources and trade networks, were the economic powerhouses of the region. Their wealth from iron, copper, and tin mining fueled not just their own society, but also Roman ambitions. Without Etruscan resources and their trade connections, Rome might have struggled to maintain the economic engine necessary for its expansion. The Etruscan influence on Rome was a complex mosaic of culture, economics, and politics, a reminder that even the most iconic civilizations are built on borrowed bricks. While the romantic tales of Roman originality make for great stories, the reality is much more intricate. It's a story of cultural symbiosis, where Rome took the best of Etruscan innovation and polished it into its own distinct identity. And so, the next time you admire a Roman sculpture or gaze upon the Latin script, spare a thought for the Etruscans. They were the unsung craftsmen behind the facade of Roman ingenuity, the quiet architects of a culture that would echo through history. As we continue this journey through Rome's cultural evolution, remember that beneath the marble and myth lies a complex tapestry woven from the threads of its Etruscan origins. And while we're far from the end of this tale, it's clear that Rome's rise was less a story of solitary genius and more a testament to the power of cultural collaboration. So here we are, standing at the crossroads of history where the Etruscans, those unsung heroes of ancient Italy, began to fade into the backdrop as Rome's star ascended. It's like watching the original band members quietly leave the stage while the lead singer hogs the spotlight. But what exactly led to this decline, and how did the Romans manage to absorb these cultural titans? Spoiler alert, it wasn't all toga parties and divine revelations. Let's paint a picture of Etruria round the 4th century BCE. Picture a patchwork quilt of independent city-states, each with its own agenda, and a neighborly competition that was a bit like rival siblings vying for the last slice of pizza. This lack of political unity was both Etruria's charm and its Achilles' heel. While the Etruscans were busy being the Renaissance men of their time, artists, engineers, and traders, their political cohesion was, well, less cohesive. Enter Rome, a city that was rapidly growing into its own, hungry for power and eager to assert itself. The Romans, who had been taking notes and borrowing ideas like a college student on a caffeine bender during finals week, saw an opportunity. Rome, now a budding republic, was organized, ambitious, and most importantly united, a stark contrast to the Etruscan city-states. By the 4th century BCE, Roman expansion was less of a trickle and more of a tidal wave, pushing northward into Etruria with the inevitability of a tax collector at your front door. Economically, the Etruscans were still sitting on valuable resources like iron and copper, but the shifting sands of trade routes started to dry up their monopoly. Rome, with its burgeoning network of alliances and military prowess, began to control the Italian peninsula's trade routes, effectively cutting off the Etruscans' access to wealth that had once flowed as freely as wine at their banquets. With economic power slipping through their fingers, the Etruscans found themselves increasingly reliant on a Roman economy that didn't have their best interests at heart. Picture being a small business in a world of corporate giants. Politically, things weren't much rosier. The Etruscans were caught in a web of alliances and enmities, both with each other and with neighboring powers like the Greeks and Carthaginians. Rome's divide-and-conquer strategy, a page straight out of the playbook for world domination, was devastatingly effective. One by one, Etruscan cities fell or were absorbed into the Roman Republic, often through treaties that promised protection in exchange for loyalty. It was like inviting a bear into your house to protect you from wolves, only to find out the bear was hungry. The final nail in the coffin was the Roman military machine, a formidable force that had perfected the art of war, thanks in no small part to, you guessed it, Etruscan innovations. The very tactics and technologies that had made the Etruscans a formidable power were now being used to subdue them. Rome's legions, with their disciplined formations and strategic acumen, were a force of nature, and the Etruscans, divided and economically weakened, couldn't withstand the pressure. Yet, as the Etruscans were absorbed into the Roman Republic, their cultural legacy didn't just vanish into the ether. Far from it. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, continued to incorporate Etruscan elements into their own society. It was like rebranding a classic hit song into a modern chart-topper. Roman religion, social customs, and even language bore the indelible imprint of their Etruscan predecessors. Take the Roman triumph, that grand military parade celebrating victory, an Etruscan invention. Or consider the Roman Senate, whose roots can be traced back to the Etruscan assembly of elders. Even the Roman fascination with omens and augury, reading the future in the flight of birds, had its origins in Etruscan ritual practices. It's as if Rome had taken a cultural blueprint and built an empire on its foundations. The Etruscans might have disappeared as a distinct political entity, but their influence was like a ghost in the Roman machine, whispering through the annals of history. While Rome strutted across the world stage, its glory was a tapestry woven with Etruscan threads. This is the ultimate irony. The conqueror, while victorious, was mightily indebted to the conquered. In the grand narrative of history, the Etruscans remind us that legacy isn't always about who stands tallest at the end. Sometimes, it's about who laid the bricks for the giants to walk on. The Etruscans may have vanished into the mists of time, but their contributions to Roman civilization ensured that their spirit lived on, even if their name did not. So next time you marvel at the grandeur of Rome, remember the Etruscans, who were the quiet architects behind the empire's towering achievements. And there you have it, a tale of cultural osmosis, political maneuvering, and the inescapable march of history. As we close this chapter, let's tip our hats to the Etruscans, those enigmatic forebears who, despite fading from the historical spotlight, left an indelible mark on the fabric of civilization. Their story is a poignant reminder that in the great symphony of history, even the quiet notes play a crucial role in the melody. In the grand theater of history, where emperors and empresses are the stars and the rest of us mere spectators, Lu Zhai wasn't content with a supporting role. Nope, she stormed onto the stage of the Han Dynasty around 202 BCE like she owned the place, and for a while she nearly did. But let's rewind the tape a bit to her entrance into the political lion's den through her marriage to Liu Bang, the founder of the Han Dynasty. A match made in the annals of power. Like any good historical power couple, they had their share of drama. Lu Zhai wasn't just another pretty face in a sea of concubines and empresses vying for the emperor's attention. She was a bona fide political powerhouse with enough cunning to make Machiavelli blush. She married Liu Bang back when he was a local official, essentially a glorified tax collector with ambitions larger than the Great Wall itself. She saw potential in this man, who was known for being a bit rough around the edges, like a diamond in the rough, or more accurately, a rock that wanted to be a diamond. Now, Liu Bang, or Emperor Geazu as he'd later be known, didn't exactly roll into power on a red carpet. His rise was more of a mud-splattered, blood-soaked trek through a battlefield that left many a contender face down in the dust. After toppling the Qin dynasty, Liu Bang established the Han dynasty in 206 BCE, which would go on to be one of China's golden ages. But behind this great man was an extraordinary woman who knew how to wield influence like a maestro conducts an orchestra. Lu Zhai was a game-changer, playing the ancient Chinese version of chess while others were busy with checkers. She navigated the treacherous waters of palace politics with all the finesse of a seasoned diplomat, albeit one who wasn't afraid to play dirty when the occasion called for it. This was a time when power was often measured by how many heads you could keep on your shoulders, and Lu Zhai made sure stayed firmly attached. Her first big political move came when Liu Bang died in 195 BCE, leaving behind a power vacuum that could have sucked the entire dynasty into chaos. Their son, Emperor Hui, was technically the new ruler, but he was a mere teenager, which in ancient Chinese politics was about as useful as a sword made of tofu. Enter Lu Zhai, the Empress Dowager who stepped up to the plate, ready to swing for the fences. She quickly took control of the court, becoming the de facto ruler of China. Now, some might say she was a power-hungry tyrant, but let's give credit where it's due. She kept the Han dynasty from crumbling into 1,000 pieces. She deftly maneuvered through political intrigues, using alliances and rivalries to her advantage like a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. She was the puppet master, and the court was a marionette. Of course, not everyone was a fan of her methods. She had a knack for making enemies, which was an occupational hazard when you were as ambitious as she was. But Lu Zhai had a secret weapon, her unparalleled ability to play one faction against another, ensuring no single group could gain enough power to challenge her. She kept her enemies close, but her allies even closer, in a carefully orchestrated dance of diplomacy and deception. One of her more infamous power plays involved the family of Liu Bang's concubine, Lady Kai. After Liu Bang's death, Lady Kai's son was seen as a threat to Lu Zhai's own son, Emperor Hui. Lu Zhai dealt with this problem with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, imprisoning Lady Kai and disposing of her son in a manner that would make even the most hardened political operatives wince. Let's just say it involved some rather creative uses of a dungeon. But before you dismiss Lu Zhai as just another ruthless ruler, remember this. She was a product of her time, a period when the political landscape was as treacherous as it was bloodthirsty. In the end, her legacy is a testament to her resilience and strategic brilliance. Whether you see her as a villain or a victim of circumstance, there's no denying her role in shaping the early Han dynasty into a force that would last for over 4 centuries. As we close this chapter on Lu Zhai's early days in power, it's clear she wasn't just a footnote in Liu Bang's story. She was a co-author of the Han dynasty's narrative, writing her own lines with a pen dipped in ambition and inked with determination. The Empress Dowager had arrived, and history was never quite the same again. As Lu Zhai took the reins of power, she was like a conductor standing before an unruly orchestra. Her first symphony was the maintenance of stability in a court as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The Han dynasty was at a tipping point, and Lu Zhai knew she had to act fast to prevent a collapse. Her method, a blend of diplomacy, intimidation, a touch of the unexpected, a political cocktail that would make any modern strategist raise a glass in admiration. Lu Zhai's role as Empress Dowager wasn't just ceremonial. She was in the thick of it, managing an empire that spanned over 2 million square kilometers. The Han Dynasty's economy was a beast, largely agrarian, with farmers paying taxes in grain, which then fed the army. Lu Zhai understood this and ensured the granaries were well stocked and the military well fed. An empire runs on its stomach, after all, and she wasn't about to let it go hungry. Her political maneuvering was nothing short of masterful. Take her handling of the court's power dynamics. It was like watching a chess grandmaster at work, except the pieces were real people and the stakes were life and death. She deftly navigated the web of alliances and rivalries, ensuring that no single faction grew too powerful. In court politics, where everyone had a knife aimed at someone else's back, Lu Zhai wielded hers with precision. But let's not sugarcoat things. Her methods were often ruthless. Remember the saga of Lady Kai and her son? That was just the beginning. Lu Zhai had a knack for dealing with rivals in ways that would make Machiavelli proud. Her ability to neutralize threats was legendary, but it also made her a target. The court was a pressure cooker of ambition and resentment, and it didn't take long for conspiracies against her to start bubbling up. One infamous plot involved a group of disgruntled nobles who thought they could outmaneuver Lu Zhai. Spoiler, they couldn't. She uncovered the plot with a kind of ruthless efficiency that left no room for second chances. The ringleaders found themselves swiftly dispatched, and if the rumors are to be believed, their end was as swift as their plotting was ill-conceived. Yet, for all her hard-edged politicking, Lu Zhai had moments where her human side shone through. Picture this: a court banquet gone awry when a drunken official decided to challenge her authority with a slurred tirade. Instead of ordering his immediate execution, an option well within her grasp, she reportedly laughed it off, quipping that even emperors had to endure fools. It was a reminder that even the most feared rulers could wield humor as a weapon. Amid these machinations, Lu Zhai faced the growing challenge of ensuring her son's legacy. Emperor Huey, despite his youth and inexperience, needed to be seen as more than a figurehead. Lu Zhai's solution: surround him with capable advisors who would bolster his image and decision-making. It was a delicate balance of giving him authority while maintaining her influence, a political tightrope walk that could have veered into disaster at any moment. The economic backdrop of Lu Zhai's reign was complex, with trade routes stretching across Asia. The Silk Road was in its infancy, promising untold wealth and exotic goods. Lu Zhai recognized the importance of these trade networks, and her policies reflected a keen understanding of their potential. By securing and expanding these routes, she ensured a steady flow of resources that bolstered the Han economy. As the years of her regency rolled on, Lu Zhai's reputation as a formidable leader grew. She was a paradox, a ruler who balanced diplomacy with iron-fisted control. Her ability to maintain order in a court fraught with tension was nothing short of remarkable. Yet, history often remembers her as much for her ruthless streak as for her political acumen. In the grand tapestry of history, Lu Zhai's story is one of contradictions, of power wielded with both grace and brutality. She was a woman who understood the art of ruling in a man's world, and she did so with a flair that ensured her place in the annals of history. But as we continue to unravel her tale, one thing is certain. Lu Zhai was no mere footnote in the Han Dynasty's saga. She was a force of nature, leaving a legacy that would echo through the corridors of power long after her reign had ended. Stay tuned for more tales from the Han court, where intrigue and ambition were the order of the day, and Lu Zhai was the unrivaled queen of the chessboard. As we dive deeper into the story of Lu Zhai, let's shed some light on how this Empress-turned-mastermind kept the Han Dynasty's wheels turning without letting them fall off the cart. Her rule wasn't just a series of royal edicts and extravagant banquets. It was a daily juggling act of policies and politics that would make any modern-day CEO break a sweat. First up, let's talk about the economy. Now, you might think imperial economics was all about gold and silk, but Lu Zhai was savvy enough to know that the backbone of her empire was agriculture. The Han Dynasty's agrarian economy was like a massive game of Monopoly, except the currency was crops, and the stakes were life or death. Lu Zhai's approach was far from what you'd expect from a supposed tyrant. She wasn't about bleeding her people dry. She knew a hungry populace was a rebellious one. So, she made sure the granaries were stocked, and the farmers were taxed fairly. Well, as fairly as you could expect in ancient China. Here's where Lu Zhai's keratin stick approach really shone. She implemented a series of tax reforms that might sound like they were concocted in a modern-day policy think tank. By lowering taxes during years of poor harvests and increasing them when farmers had surplus crops, she cleverly kept the economy stable. It was a balancing act of incentives and deterrence, not unlike a parent trying to coax a toddler into eating vegetables with the promise of dessert. In terms of social policy, Lu Zhai wasn't just sitting on her laurels either. She knew the empire was only as strong as its weakest link, so she initiated measures to promote social welfare. Her administration improved infrastructure. Roads, canals, and granaries were built or repaired, ensuring the smooth flow of goods and alleviating famine risks. Sounds like a page out of a modern urban planner's manual, right? But Lu Zhai was no bleeding heart liberal. These policies came with strings attached. Officials were monitored closely, and those who slacked off or pocketed state funds found themselves facing consequences that were decidedly less cushy than a mere demotion. Think more along the lines of a one-way trip to the afterlife. Now, here's a myth worth busting. Lu Zhai is often painted as a ruthless tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. Sure, she had her moments of medieval madness, but her reign wasn't a never-ending horror show. She was more of a pragmatist than a despot. Consider her dealings with the bureaucracy. The Han bureaucracy was a behemoth, a labyrinth where efficiency often went to die. Lu Zhai knew she needed to keep the gears greased, so she worked on streamlining the administration. She didn't just lop off heads willy-nilly. She focused on promoting meritocracy. Officials were appointed based on ability, not just birthright, which was a revolutionary idea for the time. And let's not forget the scholars. Lu Zhai understood the power of Confucianism, that ancient Chinese philosophy preaching harmony and hierarchy like a sage on a mountain. Under her watch, Confucian scholars found a renewed sense of purpose. She expanded the Imperial Academy, laying the groundwork for education reforms that would resonate for centuries. If you think about it, she was setting up the world's oldest version of a standardized exam system, another nod to modern sensibilities. But behind all this administrative brilliance was a woman who knew how to wield power like a seasoned puppeteer. She was a master of the keratin stick strategy with her officials and subjects alike. It was all about balance, rewarding loyalty and competence while harshly dealing with treachery and incompetence. The court was a place where you could either rise to glory or fall from grace, depending on which side of Lu Zhai's favor you found yourself. In the midst of these policies, Lu Zhai was also grappling with the social stratification that defined Han society. She understood the importance of maintaining the delicate balance between the nobility and the common folk. The aristocrats were the empire's power brokers, and keeping them in line was as crucial as ensuring the peasants were content. So, she navigated this social minefield with a blend of diplomacy and intimidation, ensuring that no single group could tip the scales. Yet, Lu Zhai didn't have a magic wand to wave away all problems. The empire was vast and complex, and she was constantly putting out fires, sometimes literally. Rebellions were as common as rice in a paddy, and Lu Zhai had to deal with them swiftly. Her response to insurrections was a testament to her practical, albeit tough, leadership style. She didn't hesitate to send in the troops when necessary, but she also knew when to offer amnesty, a calculated move that often quelled unrest more effectively than brute force. One of her most astute moves was recognizing the potential of the Silk Road. This trade network was still in its early days, but Lu Zhai saw the promise it held. By securing and expanding these routes, she ensured the empire's coffers were filled with exotic goods and trade flourished. It was a stroke of economic genius that not only bolstered the Han economy, but also cemented China's place in the ancient world as a hub of commerce. As we unravel the myth of Lu Zhai's tyranny, it's clear that her administration was far more nuanced than the caricature of a power-hungry empress suggests. She was a ruler who understood the art of governance in a time when the margins for error were razor-thin. Her legacy is one of balance, between kindness and cruelty, innovation and tradition, power and prudence. In the grand narrative of the Han Dynasty, Lu Zhai's story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of human ambition, frailty, and ingenuity. As we continue to explore the intricate weave of her reign, we'll find that Lu Zhai's tale is far from over. So buckle up, because the ride through the corridors of Han power is just getting started. And so, with Lu Zhai's tale already a whirlwind of power plays and precarious politics, let's zoom in on what she left behind in the grand tapestry of the Han Dynasty. Her legacy wasn't just etched in stone tablets or whispered in the corridors of palaces. It was a seismic shift in how power and governance were perceived in ancient China. Empress Lu Zhai wasn't a mere footnote in history. She was the punctuation mark that changed the narrative. First, let's tackle her political innovations, shall we? Lu Zhai was the architect of a political structure that outlived her by centuries. Her rule saw the establishment of a more centralized government, which might sound as exciting as watching paint dry, but trust me, it was revolutionary. Before her, the Han court was more of an unruly family reunion, with everyone jostling for a piece of the pie. Lu Zhai, however, tightened the reins, ensuring that the emperor, or more accurately, the Empress Dowager, held the ultimate power. This centralization not only stabilized the court, but also streamlined governance across the vast territories of the Han Empire, which stretched over 5 million square kilometers. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of her reforms. Lu Zhai's administration wasn't just about flashy decrees and grand gestures. She initiated practical policies that had long-lasting effects. Her tax reforms, for instance, were like a well-tuned economic engine. By balancing tax rates with agricultural yields, she ensured a steady revenue flow that could withstand the fickle nature of harvests. This wasn't just about filling the imperial coffers. It was about creating a safety net for the empire's economy, a move that modern economists would give a nod of approval. And then there's her influence on the legal system. Under Lu Zhai's watch, laws were codified and standardized, because nothing says stability like a good rulebook. Her legal reforms weren't about draconian control, they were about predictability. For the first time, people knew what to expect from the law, which was a novel concept in an era where justice often depended on the whims of whoever held the sword. This standardization ensured that the Han legal system remained relatively consistent long after her reign, setting a precedent that future dynasties would follow. But let's not forget the cultural impact of Lu Zhai's rule. She was a patron of Confucianism, not just because it was the philosophical flavor of the day, but because she recognized its potential to unify the empire under a common ethos. By promoting Confucian ideals of hierarchy and harmony, she reinforced the social order that kept the empire's complex web of relationships from unraveling. This wasn't just about keeping scholars happy. It was a strategic move to embed a common cultural thread throughout the empire. It was like weaving a tapestry where every thread added strength to the whole. Yet, Lu Zhai's legacy wasn't all sunshine and daisies. The story of her life became a cautionary tale for future generations, a reminder of the razor-thin line between power and peril. Her reputation as a ruthless ruler, deserved or not, cast a long shadow. She was often portrayed as a Machiavellian figure whose ambition knew no bounds. In the annals of history, she became both a warning and an inspiration, depending on who was telling the tale. To some, she was the ultimate example of why unchecked power was dangerous. To others, she was proof that a woman could not only survive, but thrive in a man's world. The cautionary aspect of Lu Zhai's life was further cemented by the fate of her family. After her death in 180 BCE, the Han court witnessed a brutal backlash against her relatives, a stark reminder that power can be as fleeting as it is intoxicating. The Lu clan, once ascendant, found themselves on the receiving end of a political purge that would make any Game of Thrones episode look like a children's tea party. It was a classic case of what goes up must come down, and it underscored the volatile nature of court politics. Yet, even as the dust settled, and the Lu clan's influence waned, the systems and structures Lu Zhai had put in place endured. Her emphasis on meritocracy, legal reform, and centralized power became the bedrock upon which subsequent Han rulers built their empires. It was as if she had planted seeds of stability that would continue to bear fruit long after her departure from the stage. In essence, Lu Zhai's story is a testament to the dizzying heights of power and the precariousness that comes with it. She was a woman who danced on the edge of a sword, wielding influence with both grace and ruthlessness. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of ambition and consequence, a reminder that history is written not just by the victors, but by those who dared to play the game in the first place. As we pull back the curtain on Lu Zhai's life and legacy, it's clear that her impact was far more than a footnote in the annals of history. She was a force of nature whose influence rippled through time, shaping the Han Dynasty in ways that would reverberate for centuries. Her story is one of contrasts, a tale of power and peril, of ambition and consequence, and of a woman who dared to defy the expectations of her time. But don't pack up your time-traveling gear just yet. There's more to uncover about the Han Dynasty's enduring legacy. In the next installment, we'll delve into how the structures Lu Zhai fortified continued to evolve, setting the stage for a golden age of prosperity and innovation. Stay tuned as we continue our journey through the corridors of ancient power, where every shadow hides a story waiting to be told. And so, we continue our exploration of history's intricate tapestry with Empress Lu Zhai as our reluctant yet riveting guide. In a world where the ink of official records was as thick as the fog of myth, Lu Zhai's story emerges not just as a tale of power and ambition, but as a litmus test for how we remember women who dared to wield influence. Strap in, because we're about to dissect the myth and reality of her reign, one sharp observation at a time. First off, let's confront the elephant in the room. Was Lu Zhai a villain or a visionary? History, as they say, is written by the victors, or at least by whoever happens to be holding the pen at the time. In Lu Zhai's case, her reputation was scribbled in the margins of a male-dominated narrative. She's often portrayed as the quintessential evil stepmother of imperial folklore, a woman whose ruthlessness was matched only by her ambition. But let's flip that script for a moment. If Lu Zhai had been a man, would her actions still be seen as villainous, or would they be lauded as the mark of a strong ruler? Look at the facts. Lu Zhai managed to hold an empire together with the finesse of a tightrope walker balancing on a thread of ambition. She did this in a world where powerful women were as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. She consolidated power, reformed the economy, and maintained order during a time of potential chaos. Yet, her methods often veered into the realm of the Machiavellian. Take her handling of Lady Kai and the subsequent purge of rivals. These are the actions that fueled her reputation as a tyrant, a label that has stuck like gum on the sole of history's shoe. Now, here's a juicy tidbit for the myth-busting enthusiasts. Lu Zhai's portrayal as a power-hungry despot has roots in the writings of historians from the Confucian tradition, which favored male authority and often vilified women who stepped out of the domestic sphere. Her story wasn't just about her actions. It was also about the cultural and social lens through which those actions were viewed. It's like looking at a painting through different colored glasses. Change the lens, and the picture transforms entirely. But let's not sugarcoat the reality. Lu Zhai's reign was not without its dark corners. Her political purges weren't mere footnotes. They were headlines in the annals of Han history. Yet, what's often glossed over is the sheer necessity of her actions in maintaining stability. The Han court was a veritable Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with just as much drama. In such an environment, power wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. Lu Zhai's story reminds us that political survival often demands choices that blur the lines between necessity and cruelty. As we unravel the myth of Lu Zhai's tyranny, it's worth noting how her story reflects the broader narrative of powerful women in history. From Cleopatra to Elizabeth I, women who wielded power have often been painted with broad strokes of villainy or seduction. It's as if history has been written with a quill dipped in bias, leaving us to wonder, is the villainous portrayal a reflection of their actions or of society's discomfort with women in power? In this context, Lu Zhai stands as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the complexities of leadership. Her life was a masterclass in the art of political survival, a delicate dance on a knife's edge, where every step could mean the difference between triumph and tragedy. Her legacy, therefore, is a mosaic of ambition and consequence, a reminder that the line between vision and villainy is often as thin as a silk thread. As we reach the final act of Lu Zhai's story, let's take a moment to reflect on her impact. It's easy to get lost in the drama of her reign, but beneath the surface lies a legacy that reshaped the Han Dynasty. Her centralization of power laid the groundwork for a more cohesive state, while her economic reforms ensured the stability of an empire that spanned continents. And yet, her story is also a mirror held up to the face of historical memory, challenging us to question how we remember those who defy the norms. So, as we close the chapter on Empress Lu Zhai, let's not just remember her as a footnote in a larger narrative, but as a complex figure whose life was a testament to the art of governance in an unforgiving world. Her tale is a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, frailty, and ingenuity. In the end, Lu Zhai's legacy is as much about the questions it raises as the answers it provides, a fitting conclusion to a story that continues to captivate and confound in equal measure. And there you have it, folks. Empress Lu Zhai, part villain, part visionary, all human. History, as always, remains a work in progress, and the story of Lu Zhai is no exception. Her narrative challenges us to think critically about how we view power, gender, and legacy. So next time you find yourself flipping through the pages of history, remember to look beyond the myths and dig a little deeper. You never know what truths you might uncover, or what questions you might find yourself asking. Until next time, stay curious, question everything, and keep digging into the past. After all, history is far too interesting to be left to the dusty pages of textbooks.